Hello, everybody, and welcome to Life, the Complete Story. As always, I am your host, Tyler, joined by my lovely co-host, Alex.
Hello, everyone. We got a bit of a special episode for you today. As you can see, Tyler and I are together in the same room for the first time recording rather than just uh, through webcams and microphones. So it'd be a little different today. Today we got something real special for you. As we said last week, we're going to go through it's a subphylum actually, but it primarily covers the insect, but it's the subphylum Hexapoda, which of course the insects are a pretty big chunk of what we're going to be talking about today. So we're kind of doing a bit of a super episode today. So apologies, this is probably going to be a long one, but it's going to be an interesting one, as you'll see once we get to the lesson. But of course, we're going to start today. Typically, we start with a bit of like a news article from the week, something that nature in the news that we find really interesting. But every so often, Tyler sneaks in a game for us. So what are we looking at today? Like a bit of a game today.
Right. So I like throwing these games when we do special things. A lot of times we do these double features where we'll record 2 episodes, and I don't feel like pulling a news article for the second one, so we play a game. But since we're together in person, we're going to do a blind ranking where I will give Alex 5. We're going to stick with insects today since we're in that grouping. I'll give him 5 insects, and he has to rank them 1 through 5 in terms of, we'll say, I don't know, his favorites today.
Okay, we'll just do my favorite groups. All right.
Yeah, we'll start. Where do we want to start with?
How are you gonna? You go like through the orders, through just different insects.
I was gonna pick different insect species.
Okay,
so
that's fine.
Oh, you need to take a drink. We'll start with caddisflies.
Caddisflies. We'll put them kind of in the mid. Like probably they're like an easy 3 because of course if you're like a fisherman, they're very important for especially like some of those more cold water, upstream, like stream river ecosystems where it's those high mountain streams. You get a lot of those. They're an important food source for a lot of those fish, like trout. But they're not nothing too like spectacular.
Right.
I'd say
they're useful, but
yeah, they're useful. They're an important member of the ecosystem, but they're not quite as important as some of the other ones that are more useful, kind of more important when it comes to the different ecological standpoints. We'll put them at 3.
3, okay.
Yeah, solid 3.
Next we'll go with the acorn weevil.
The acorn weevil.
Now, a little background here.
Yeah,
Alex, for his senior research project, did a project with the oak tree,
specifically white oaks.
White oaks, and how they are able to withstand invasive species.
Yeah, kind of an invasive species as well as some of the just the different environmental pressures, because of course they are more of an early successional species, very slow growing but very long living. They grow quite large. We had some species when I did it at college on campus. There was one. The college was founded during the Civil War or right before the Civil War, I think.
Yeah, late 1800s, like 1870s.
I think it was 1867.
There's a 7 somewhere in there.
I think it was 1861 because when we were there, we hit the 170th anniversary.
That's wild.
I think so. So it was an older school.
Long story short,
there's a tree that is probably what I don't remember what I said the diameter was. So typically trees you measure them diameter at chest height. DBH is the shortened term for it. That they use, and it was well over almost 2 meters in diameter. Like it was,
that's like a 6 foot.
Yeah,
diameter
I mean,
tree.
it was quite. I don't know if it was quite 2 meters, but it's a very large. It's easily 200-year-old tree. I'd guess that'd be something good to eventually. Unfortunately, like anything else, when it dies, that'd be something to study for sure. Get get a good cross section of it.
Absolutely.
Just to measure, just to see how old it is. But
back
so
to the acorn.
The acorn weevil. So I was collecting acorns. Tyler actually helped me a little bit with it, and I failed to check the acorns before I collected from different trees, and I had them in some just paper bags, like a typical brown school lunch bag, and it.
We lost about 75%.
Yeah, like 50, probably at least 50% of the acorns, because there's actually a way to check the acorns if they've been infested with the acorn weevil.
There's
which
typically a pinhole in it.
Yeah, like a little pinhole. When you put them in like a glass of water, the ones that are infested will float. And I didn't check for that, so a couple of days went by, and I went to plant the acorns, or start some of the acorns to plant them to start the mature trees, and the bags were full of the larvae as they were exiting the acorns.
Yeah, our lab was infested with weevil grubs for
we had a lot of
2 weeks afterwards.
Yeah, because I believe the weevils, we'll talk about them, fall into the order Coleoptera.
Yes.
So they are beetles, or they fall into the beetle order. So we'll put them at a 4. Because
they're incredibly cute, though. If you ever see,
they're little,
an acorn beetle to share.
Yeah, an acorn beetle.
They're very cool. Like these little short little snouts, huge eyes, and a little stubby. Yep, there we go. He's pulling it up right now.
Yep. Pull up a picture here.
Stubby little legs, kind of a long snout that they use to kind of
these little
put
guys
themselves into
these little guys right here. So now for farmers, there are weevils that will go after, as you can see, the way that snout is. They will infest various plants. So some farmers really hate weevils because they can cause significant crop damage if you get a big enough infestation. But these ones, they're native. They kind of fall in that. They help with a little bit of that control, that biological control. But of course, like most trees, those oak trees, they produce thousands on thousands of acorns in a hope that one makes it to maturity.
Right.
Now, of course, some of these trees were in parks, so most of those acorns were never going to reach maturity, if they even had a chance to establish. But at the same time, not too damaging, because they focus primarily on acorns, so they feed on specifically trees within the oak family. Right. So we'll put them at 4.
So we got caddisflies at 3, acorn weevils at 4. Let's go. Let's do the Atlas moth. And if you need to pull a picture up of
Atlas moth, yeah, I said that's one. I haven't. Not sure.
They're pretty cool. They're nocturnal, obviously. They're moths.
Oh yes, they're
Atlas
beautiful. Moth. They are gorgeous.
And they're gigantic.
They are massive. Yeah, we'll put this guy probably at number 2 because that's just cool looking.
They're very cool looking.
So I'll pull up this image here for you guys to see. It is bigger than the size of your typical person's hand. So, boy, I think that this image may be a little small. So let me zoom in some.
Funny, yeah.
There we go. So you can see quite large, very beautiful. That one looks like a male moth. You can tell because of the antennae; they're very fluffy. Right. They use those to find the females through pheromones, which is probably something we'll cover today, especially when we get to the hymenopterans, which is like the ants. So we'll put these guys at 2. Very, very cool looking, very beautiful.
Found
moths.
in, I believe, Asia.
Asia. Okay. There are moths native to many different areas that are similar size.
Lepidoptera is the grouping that has butterflies and moths in that, and they're found worldwide except for Antarctica. No, there's no insects on Antarctica, really.
All right, so then we got 2 more.
Let's go with the tsetse fly. Do you know what the tsetse fly is? So the tsetse fly is a species of fly that lives in Africa, and they're terrible for people.
Tsetse fly. Oh, this is the.
They do the sleeping sickness, right?
Yes. So I believe so. Yeah. So they are. Yeah, they are the ones that cause African sleeping sickness. Is the name of the disease. So it is. I don't remember exactly about the disease, but yeah, their larvae when they bite or when I think it's when they
flies,
bite.
like when the adults themselves bite, isn't it?
I believe so. When the adults bite, if they're infected with the African sleeping sickness, which
they're
is
a vector for it.
yeah. So we'll put them at number 5 because I mean, similar to like horse flies native to the United States, when they bite, probably hurts, and of course they transmit the disease. Um,
Yeah.
But like many tropical species, it's hard for them to not. There's so many different things that are endemic to the tropical areas that cause different diseases.
Malaria, yellow
Yeah.
fever,
Things like that.
West Nile, things like that. Most of it's mosquitoes, but
yeah, mosquitoes, but other flies as well will transmit those.
And
last
one is going to be the giraffe beetle.
The giraffe beetle.
Giraffe beetles are sick. They have these really long necks, for the lack of a better word.
Oh, those are cool looking.
They're very.
I'm glad these guys are going into number 1 because that's the only spot that's left. They're pretty cool looking, kind of funky.
But they have a reddish outer wing. We'll talk about elytra is what it's called.
Well named. So once this comes up here, you can see got that funky long neck. Kind of cool. Those are pretty cool looking.
Aptly named giraffe beetles.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm glad those guys went to number 1.
They're native to Madagascar.
Okay.
As most freaky things are.
Yes.
In the Coleoptera family, similar to the weevils. These are actual beetles, though. I was going to be, I don't know, more generous and give them something you knew about, like a Hercules beetle or a stag beetle.
Yes.
But I thought this one would be cool, too.
That is cool.
But that's going to conclude our game for today.
Yeah.
Moving on, we'll get into our lesson.
We got quite a doozy for you guys today.
Yeah, on our note sheet, we're looking at about...
we got a lot going on today.
15, no, more than that.
Lot
of pages.
We got a lot for you guys today, so we'll try to keep it interesting. But of course, insects. This is something that pretty much everyone knows about. Everyone has seen an insect.
Yeah.
A lot of people just use the generic term of bug if you speak English.
Yeah.
But bug is a more generic term that people will use also for some of the other groups of arthropods we talked to, like the arachnids, like spiders, or even I forget the name off the top of my head, but like millipedes, centipedes, things like that.
Myriapods.
Yeah, myriapods. So that general term of bug.
But there is a grouping in Insecta called the true bugs, and we'll get to them.
Yes.
Later on today.
Yeah.
But first, let's go over hexapoda, which is what the insects actually fall under.
Yes.
So hexapods are named for most distinct feature. They have a 3-part body plan. Oh my god, I cannot speak today. With a consolidated thorax and 3 pairs of legs. So hexapoda means 6 legs, 3 pairs.
Yeah.
Where most other arthropods have more than that. The myriapods have dozens upon dozens of legs. Most of your crustaceans have at least 10. Spiders have 8. The arachnids mostly have 8 legs.
Yeah.
And these include the crown group class Insecta, as well as some smaller classes. Entonatha, which includes the wingless arthropods, which used to be considered insects, the springtails, the coneheads, and the 2-pronged bristletails. So, not quite insects, but also 6-legged arthropods, so they don't fit in the other groups.
Yeah, so they're just different enough that they're not quite insects. Some of the different things that go into them, like the Protura, the coneheads, they kind of have a very long abdomen that it's multiple segments, and then a shorter head and thorax region, and then as well, same with the Diplora, kind of a little elongated. Most of the insects are a bit shorter, and we'll talk about that as we go through them. But like we said, Insecta is our major group within the hexapods, one that most people know of. So these are the largest group within the arthropod phylum. So as we said, overall, the last few weeks, we've been talking about arthropods. Arthropoda is the largest group, phylum. So in the first episode, when we talked about your um, classifications, you work down, have your domain or super kingdom, and then phylum is your next group down. So um, then after that, you have domain, kingdom, phylum, class. So class is Insecta. They are the largest class within the arthropods, even bigger than the crustaceans. So
And then we're going to go into the orders
yes,
within Insecta today. And
just because it's a little different, as we talked about with the crustaceans, most of the orders, they're smaller or at least similar enough that we can kind of generalize just the class, like Malacostraca or Crustacea, some of those subclasses. But
in insects,
there's a lot of diversity, as we'll talk about.
Not only is there diversity within the orders, there's diversity within the genus. We're not going to get that far down.
No.
We'd be here for days
Yes.
if we talked about each
Yeah.
genus.
Yeah, we could do a day just for each order, just do a whole episode if we went down all the way down to the genus level.
Yeah.
So insects, of course, they all have a chitinous exoskeleton, as we talked in the past. That chitin, it's a protein sugar complex that forms that outer shell, quote unquote, layer, that exoskeleton. They have we talked about, that 3-part body plan. So they have a head, thorax, and abdomen. They're very defined usually.
There's not much cephalization of the thorax.
Correct. Yeah. So if you think of a generic one that most people are familiar with, the ant, you can say very clear head region, then the clear thorax region, which is where your legs are attached, and then the abdomen region behind that kind of course, holds the other things like the reproductive organs, most of your gut, things like that, and actually a lot of the like the heart, quote unquote, that circulatory and breathing system, which we'll talk about a little bit. So of course they all have 3 pairs, so 6 as far as hexapoda, 3 pairs of jointed legs, compound eyes. So especially if you think of flies, those real big eyes, they actually have a lot of little sections that form kind of an array, but think like a kaleidoscope picture. And then of course a pair of antennae at the front, which they use to sense the environment around them. Insects are the most
the key part about that is they have a singular pair of antennae. A lot of the other species with other groups we talked about, Malacostraca have 2 pairs. Trilocerates have none. Depends on the species. Most spiders and scorpions do not, I believe.
No,
but the mites do.
The myriapods did.
Myriapods did. Yep.
So of course the most diverse group of animals on the planet. There's over 1 million described species, and that is what has been described. There are more, especially in the tropics. They find new species daily of different insects. They're just so diverse, and of course, them being primarily very small, it is hard for us to sometimes find them. I mean, it's the point that there are some that could species that could because differentiate from another species and then go extinct before we ever know that they existed.
Right.
That's how diverse and widespread the insects are. So they actually represent more than half of all the animal species on the planet. So in the entire kingdom Animalia that we've been talking about, and we'll continue to talk about for a while, the insects are half of that entire group. So think of how many species we've talked about already, how many we will talk about as we get into more, because we haven't even talked about like the fishes or the mammals yet.
We haven't touched chordates yet.
Correct. Yeah. So there's a massive amount of these across the entire planet. So if you want to go into a little bit more of the body plan.
Yeah. So insects have a nervous system consisting of their brains. So these guys actually have brains. A lot of the other groups we talked about just have like a grouping of ganglia that's centralized, that they count as a quote-unquote brain. They have a ventral nerve cord, so kind of like a spinal column, but they don't have a vertebrae per se. It's just kind of like a cord that runs throughout from head to the end of the abdomen. Yes. And most are oviparous. They lay eggs. Some, very few, give birth to live young, but for the majority, they lay eggs. They breathe air through a system of paired openings along their sides. These are those top terms. Spiracles.
Yes.
Spiracles. Um, Connecting to small tubes to take air directly to the tissue. So they don't have lungs per se. They get this air through their spiracles. It kind of gets transferred through a trachea and then sent to the tissue directly. Uh, the blood does not carry any oxygen. It is only partly contained in vessels, and some circulates in an open hemocoel. So they have this big open blood um, column, not really any circulatory veins or anything like that. Although some do have like veiny wings to transfer, but it's more or less a cooling system.
Yeah, it kind of helps cool the body because um, something that's not on here, but in those um, insects only have striated muscle, I believe is the technical term. So think of like like skeletal muscle, so something like a bicep, something that helps move body parts. In mammals, you have that striated muscle as well as smooth muscle for like things like the internal organs, like the gut. But the insects only have that one kind of muscle, like that helps them. That's what helps them fly. Um, but because of that, think when you run, your body generates a lot of heat. Same thing with that. The insects, they generate a lot of heat, especially when they fly. So those veins help cool because that the wings are thin, just a thin membrane.
So they're susceptible to overheating. So the veins within the wings help to cool down the muscles while they're in use. That's why a lot of the more ground terrestrial, not quite flying insects, they have wings sometimes. Like beetles have wings, but they're not the the veiny ones you think of when you think of like flies and stuff.
Yeah, and they're not the primary mode of transportation. They typically crawl, which is why they also tend to be a little larger because they can withstand that. They don't fly as much, so they don't overheat quite the same way.
Right. So as we alluded to earlier, the insect vision is mainly through their compound eyes, with additional small ocelli. So the ocelli is more of like a simple eye that they use for like light and darkness detection. Some use their ocelli for like UV. Uh, I know the butterflies and the lepidoptera use it for like a navigation because they're very migratory compared to other insects. Um, some can hear using tympanal organs, which may be on their legs or other parts of their body. So, what's a good example of that? You crickets?
Yeah, crickets are like are a good example where they have it's just like a little membrane kind of organ that senses the vibrations in the air, similar to your eardrum. Um, is something that when we get to the amphibians, especially like the frogs and the toads, we'll make a point to note that out. It's a very pronounced on them because they don't have an ear, but you can see that membrane. That's like an eardrum, quote unquote. Of course, they don't.
Called the tympanum.
Yeah, of course, insects don't have ears. They use these organs to hear.
And they have chemoreceptors on their antennae and on their mouth parts to help them smell.
Yes.
Um, and like I said, nearly all hatch from eggs. And insect growth is constrained by the inelastic exoskeleton. So they only can grow as big as the exoskeleton allows. Uh, and it involves a series of molts. So you molt a new exoskeleton so you can grow a little bit more before you molt again. And a lot of times they go through a complete metamorphosis. So you start as an egg, you hatch into a larva, or you'll pupate, and then you will emerge as an adult, a fully sexual mature adult. From there,
There's some so there's kind of two types of that metamorphosis as we call it. There's a that he said that there's a 4 stage and a 3 stage. That 4 stage is what Tyler was talking about, where you hatch an egg, you have the larval stage, and then that pupa, which is typically immobile. So if you think butterflies are a fantastic example of this, where they hatch and you have the caterpillar, which then they form that pupa, and then they emerge as an adult, which it's an entirely different body plan. So they go from that very worm-like structure to a full adult which is the typical insect structure. And then there's also what's called a 3-stage metamorphosis, which would be considered like incomplete metamorphosis.
Like the lanternflies, when we talked about them in the invasive species, they have an egg and they have a larval stage, which just goes through a whole bunch of instars that don't really look different per se. Maybe physiologically, in terms of like different color patterns and stuff before they become an adult, but
they're still very adult-like in those nymphal stages. So, like the lanternfly, for example, the larval stage, those instars, they don't have wings. They just jump using their legs. They're plant hoppers, so they jump with those legs. But then that final stage, they do have wings. They are able to fly short distances as well as that hopping motion. But they're still adult-like. It's not like the caterpillars where it's a completely different body plan, which then changes as they become adults. So, and this is throughout the insect, the whole class of Insecta. It varies between the orders. I believe that the 3-stage metamorphosis is more prominent, just because it's a bit easier, and say like energy-wise, it's easier, but it just depends on the different orders, the different organisms, as to why. Of course, different genetics that cause those changes, those different styles of metamorphosis. I'm sure there's advantages and disadvantages to each, but that's something we did not do a whole lot of research on. Something if we wanted to do like a bonus episode at some point, if you guys are interested, we could talk about that if we wanted to.
Insect evolution and metamorphosis. Yes. We could just cover that when we get to amphibians, because they do a lot of metamorphosis as well.
Yes.
So we're going to hop into our orders now. Our first order is going to be Odonata. That is your order of damselflies and dragonflies. They are completely predatory in both their naiad or nymph stage as well as their adult form, correct?
Yes.
Two groups are distinguished with dragonflies, which is the suborder Epiprocta, usually being bulkier with larger compound eyes, and wings spread up or out at rest. So they either
when they land, they either their wings, they usually have 2 pairs of wings. They'll either just be out to the sides, kind of as they rest, or they're like kind of upright a little bit. Whereas the damselflies, which is the other suborder Zygoptera, they're typically more slender. The eyes are placed a little further apart and they're smaller, but the wings fold back along the body. And that's kind of a funky image to think of. Yeah, actually, I'll just pull up an image for you guys.
I'll keep talking here. So this is Zygoptera, which is the damselflies, are typically more slender, and their eyes are placed further apart when they fold their wings together at rest. Adult Odonata can land and perch, but they rarely walk. They prefer to use flight as their main locomotion. And they all have aquatic larvae that they call, the naiad or nymph. All of them, adults and larvae, are carnivorous, like I said, and eat mostly other insects, smaller insects like other aquatic larvae in their larval stage, smaller flies. There we go.
There you go. So you can see the damselflies here. Those wings fold back along the body. They're kind of hard to see. But then the dragonflies, they just spread out. You can see the dragonfly, it's a bit thicker, a bit bulkier, with a very pronounced eyes at the front of the head close together. The damselfly, they're smaller, spread apart more, and they have a more slender body, as you can see in the image here. So I'll leave that up as we continue through these guys.
Yeah, and so as I was saying, they're all carnivorous. They eat other insect larvae. Most of the time, the naiads eat whatever they can beat in a fight. So that includes smaller fish, tadpoles, and even some newt species. And the adults are very good aerial hunters, very agile and quick, compared to other flighted insects. And their legs are specialized, as you can kind of see in these pictures. That front pair of legs is very good at like grabbing and catching prey.
Yeah, they're kind of, you can see in the picture, they're angled forward, kind of that raptorial style when we talked, similar to how we talked about with the um, mantis shrimp, where that forward, they're able to use those to grab prey and scoop it. And then from there, it's right there at the mouth, they're able to eat it as they catch that.
So that'll conclude our Odonata. We're going to go into the next group, which is kind of closely related, and they probably branched off of the dragonfly, of the Odonata, probably sometime around the Triassic Cretaceous period. These are going to be Ephemeroptera, also known as the mayflies. So, Alex, if you'd like to...
Yep, let me pull up an image here real quick first before I get into... So those are your mayflies. So like we said, it's an ancient group of insects, or part of an ancient group of insects called termed Paleoptera. So I think paleo is like historic. So they kind of in that larger grouping with dragonflies and damselflies. Within this order, there's over 3,000 species known worldwide. So they're grouped into 400 genera with 42 families. So it's there's a pretty widespread organism. They have a lot of the ancestral traits that were most likely present within the first flying insects, such as the long tail and then the wings that don't fold flat over the abdomen. They kind of fold, you can see fold upwards like over top of the body. Their immature stages are, so those naiads or nymphs are present in fresh water. So the nymphs are purely aquatic. But they're actually very important in the sense that they're very intolerant to pollution in that nymphal stage, especially. So the presence of them indicates a very clean, highly oxygenated environment.
This is coming along in a lot of these nymphal stages. They're very good bioindicators of water quality in these freshwater streams.
Correct. Yeah, and some are less tolerant than others. Like the mayflies are fairly intolerant. So you see them a lot in more of the like headwaters area where you get that cold, highly oxygenated, like very churned up water. Whereas there's some like the caddisflies are a little more tolerant, and then things like stoneflies are even more tolerant. You see them in a little more of that slower moving water, but it all depends on the different areas, and different species are slightly more tolerant than others. They're also unique in insect orders where the terrestrial adult stage that you can see, they have a fully winged pre-adult stage, which so they have, as they spawn from the water, they have, they're not fully adults yet. They have that, they call it a sub-imago stage, which then molts into the adult stage, like you see here, which is just the imago. That's the sexually mature adult. That's the one that reproduces. I believe the fully adult stages do not feed. If they do, it's very minimal. They don't spend a lot of time in this stage. And then, of course, these mayflies, they hatch, like I said, that emergence. I forget the technical term for it. There is a term used amongst, especially fly fishermen. These are very popular among fly fishermen. But when they emerge as those adults, and that's spring to autumn. So mayfly is a kind of misnomer. So it's not just in that May time frame, but of course that being kind of that later spring is probably about, you'll see a lot of them because that's when they start to hatch. But they hatch in very large numbers at one time. So a lot of insects say that survival by numbers. They just overpower the predators just by sheer numbers. That allows them to reproduce and survive because there's so many of them that the predators can't eat all of them just because there's no way for them to. There's just too many. But that we'll then move on to our next order. So like we said, we're kind of going through some overviews very, very quick. As we always say, if there's something about each order you want to hear more about, want us to go more in depth, let us know. We'd love to go more into depth, but today we're doing our broad overviews, just so you guys get an idea of all of the orders in Insecta, because there's a lot of them.
We've coined this our super episode so far, but we also don't want to make it a 3-hour endeavor for you guys to listen to.
Correct.
So we're trying to make it quick and concise, but also cover the entire topic. So next is going to be the Zoroptera, which are commonly known as angel insects. They have small, soft bodies with two forms. They either have a winged with sheddable wings like termites, or dark. They have a dark and with eyes and ocelli, or they have a wingless, pale, and without eyes. Which would be, what would be an example of that, Alex?
I am not sure.
Give us 1 second. Alex, why don't you pull up a picture while
I will
do
so. So, like we said, I'm not sure if they're 100% actually the termites themselves. I believe the termites are hymenopterans, but they look very similar to termites.
Yeah. But a lot of times you'll see these in areas with like dry wood or leaf litter. That's where they kind of live. They make their colonies there. They have the characteristic 9-segmented beaded antenna. You can kind of see in this picture here the beaded antennae. And they have mouth parts adapted for chewing, so they'll oftentimes chew this dried up bark or these leaf litter. Try anything else in it, Alex?
I was looking, but not a lot. It's a smaller order of the Insecta, the third smallest. There's only about 30 species, so they're not a big order. They look, like we said, they look very similar to termites, but they are not termites. They're a bit more solitary. They scavenge on like fungal spores in the mycelium, so like the root system, quote unquote, of the fungi. Sometimes they eat little mites. But as we said, like this one would be that small, wingless, typically blind. They're very terrestrial, living underneath the leaf litter.
So there's not much on these guys. There's only, like Alex said, there's only 30 species, as we kind of covered. You got chewing mouth parts. Most important feature is that 9-beaded antenna. They live under bark, oftentimes in dry wood or leaf litter. So we'll move on into our next group, Dermaptera, which would be your earwigs. About 2,000 species and 12 families. This is considered one of the smaller orders as well, even though 2,000 seems like a large number to me.
Yeah, but when you can compare it to the millions of species of insects, 2,000 is a small number comparatively.
Correct. But they have this characteristic cerci, that pair of forcep-like pinchers in their back. Alex kind of highlighting that for our video listeners. On the back of their abdomen. They kind of have membranous wings. They're really small, folded underneath their forewings. So they have so the Dermaptera means skin wing. That's where they get their name. There's this membranous wing under these skin-like forewings.
Yeah, so very small. They really don't use the wings at all. They can, but very rarely. As you can see, they're very small, to the point I'm sure in some of the adults of the larger species, they're probably too small to really support much flight, if any. They typically are crawling insects, living underneath of in moist environments, especially under like different plant detritus, rotting wood, leaf litter, things like that, or kind of in the corners of some structures. Most people have seen these before. They are native to everywhere, but every continent but Antarctica. So again, very widespread. group.
Right. So Alex said they eat smaller insects and mostly plant detritus. However, some are known to be these tiny parasites in mammals, but those species typically lack those typical pincers at the rear abdomen. Um, they're not exactly necessary for their development, so they kind of evolve to lose them over time. And they have 5 molts in the year before they become a sexually mature adult. They have maternal care, which is typically uncommon in insects. A lot of times they just lay the eggs and go. Most of the time the adults die within days of laying their eggs.
Yeah, it depends. Some orders survive for multiple cycles. Some it's kind of like a yearly uh, cycle where they hatch, grow, become adults, and the adults die at the end of the year, and then the eggs survive over the winter. If there is a winter, if they're in an area where like a winter or even a dry season in the more tropical areas, that dry season they'll stay in that uh, egg state for a while until the rain returns and the food's more readily available.
We're going to die pause.
Yeah.
Let's see, where are we at here? Yeah, so the moms will kind of lay the eggs and keep watch and care for them up until the second molt. From that point, that's when the sexual dimorphism comes in. That's whenever you expect, like, an earwig, they show like a difference in their rear pincers. I think the males are more pincer-like, and
Probably a bit larger.
the females are more like needle-like almost.
Yeah.
Kind of not as sturdy looking, more just like rear antennae almost don't serve the same purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say the males is probably larger. They may use those for something like displays when mating. I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to do more research, but I'd say the males are probably larger, more curved. You said that more kind of pinchy shape, whereas the females are probably more like the image for viewers, that kind of more slender, not quite as broad or pronounced, and they probably don't use them quite as intensely.
So from there, we're going to move into the next grouping, Alex. That'll be the Plecoptera. Why don't you
Yes, sir.
kick us
Pull
off?
up real quick our stoneflies.
Yes.
These are, again, a similar grouping like our... find a good image for you guys here to see both the adults and the nymphal stages.
Yeah, they kind of fit in that grouping with Odonata and
Ephemoptera, especially like the mayflies. They kind of occupy a similar niche. Let me zoom a little bit before I get going on some of our information. Whoop, too much.
Perfect.
There we go. All right. So, like I said, the Plecoptera stoneflies is what they're known as. There's about 3,500 species described worldwide, with, like many other insects, new species being described all the time. Of course, found worldwide except Antarctica, like the vast majority of insects. They're believed to be one of the most primitive groups within Neoptera, which is a larger grouping of insects. They have close relatives that were identified from the Carboniferous and the lower Permian periods geologically. So the true stoneflies that you see today are known from fossils that are not much younger, and of course their modern diversity is from that Mesozoic area. So the time of the dinosaurs is when the most modern diversity is seen. Of course, found both in the northern and southern hemispheres, which distinct populations in each, although the evolutionary evidence suggests that the species crossed the equator on a number of different occasions before becoming more geographically isolated. So probably in times when water levels were lower, there's more land available, it was easier for them to cross, or when different river systems were more pronounced as they have changed over the millions of years, many millennia, made it more easy for them to access different areas. But as you said, you can see here the adult stage, they do fly. So like any other insect, it's possible they could have spread out that way, flown to those new areas. Of course, like other insects with aquatic nymphs, they are intolerant of water pollution, and their presence in a stream or even in still water is an indicator of very good water quality, if not even excellent. The those nymphal species that you can see on the top there live in that benthic zone, so that bottom, pretty much on the substrate of your lakes and streams. They're well oxygenated, as we said, similar to the mayflies. There are a few species that have been found in New Zealand and some of those neighboring islands that actually do have terrestrial nymphs, so they do live on land, but typically in very moist environments, probably your kind of swampy, boggy areas where there's a lot of water, so that way they can breathe through not quite gill-like structures, but similar. And of course, the nymphs, they physically resemble the wingless adults. And on the rear there, you can see they're kind of like external gills, but they can be present on any part of the body. And they acquire oxygen, typically like many other insects, diffusing it through the exoskeleton or through those gills that can be located pretty much anywhere, either behind the head, on the thorax, or even around the anal region. And then, of course, due to the requirement of, as we said, that well-oxygenated water to diffuse it through the exoskeleton, they are sensitive to water pollution, making them important indicators. As nymphs, the vast majority of the species are herbivorous, eating plant matter, algae, things like that. But there are some that do hunt other aquatic arthropods, probably other benthic species, the stonefly, different nymphal species, I'm sure, similar size or a little smaller. So as well, I believe the stoneflies are also the ones that the nymphs will actually build kind of little shells around them, around themselves. I have to double check that. Can't remember if that is specifically the stoneflies that do that, or if it's a different species, different group.
Don't ask me what they are. I don't know.
Yeah,
there's a group that we're trying to remember. They kind of like collect rocks and other things in the area to
kind of create a little, not quite a kind of like a cocoon shape, like a little structure that they carry behind them. It may be the caddisflies. I'm not 100%. I'd have to look a little more. I know it's something that you see a lot. Like we said, those fly fishermen use these nymphal aquatic nymphs that live, use them for those different lures when they're fishing. So that'll take us next to our next grouping of. Is it caddisflies? Okay, so it is caddisflies.
We'll get there.
We haven't talked to you. So our next group is one that many people are familiar with. It's one of the somewhat larger groups, the larger orders. That is Orthoptera, which is your grasshoppers, locusts, crickets, katydids. I believe the
giant weta, which is giant cricket. I was going to put that on one for today.
Okay.
No, that's too safe.
Do the cicadas fall under this as well?
I don't think so.
I don't believe so. I believe they are in a different group.
They are.
Okay.
So there's over 20,000 species worldwide. They have an incomplete metamorphosis and produce sound known as stridulation by rubbing their wings against each other's. If you ever hear the crickets chirping at night in summertime, that's them rubbing their wings together. Or sometimes they use their legs, depends on the species. The tympanum, which we alluded to, is that sound receptor or ear, is located in the front tibia in crickets, which is that's the front portion of your leg, correct?
Yeah. So on their rear legs that you can see in the image that was pulled up, kind of those jumping legs for folks that are kind of know what we're talking about when we talk about like grasshoppers, those rear legs that are very large, much more pronounced. That section that connects to the thorax would be similar to the femur in our own bodies, um, that large leg portion. They rub that against their wings to make the sound as well as using the wings. But that's kind of where that tympanum is found.
Right. At least in the crickets, mole crickets, and bush crickets. But it's found on the first abdominal segment in grasshoppers and locusts. So more towards that what is that called? Pronotum in this image, which is that yellow shaded area. That's where you'll find the tympanum in um, grasshoppers.
Okay.
They have a general cylindrical body, as you can kind of see in these images, with elongated hind legs and a musculature adapted for jumping, as Alex said. Uh, they have mandible mouth parts, so kind of biting, chewing parts rather than grinding parts.
Mm-hmm.
And they have large compound eyes. But some species have ocelli and some do not. And the antennae have multiple joints with them and are a filiform type of varying lengths.
So kind of long, very kind of thread-like antennae, as you can see in the image, especially on your
bush cricket katydids and your normal crickets.
Yeah, the mole. You said the mole cricket. There are some species that are a little more subterranean. They kind of live like right under the surface. They have shorter hind legs, and their antennae are much shorter as they don't jump as much. They kind of dig a little more to get at some of the underground plant matter.
Right. The first and third segments on the thorax are larger, while the second segment is a much smaller segment. They have two pairs of wings held overlapping in the abdomen at rest, so they kind of lay over the rest of the body when they're resting. The forewings are narrower than the hind wings and are hardened at the base, so more of a protective coating to the wing.
On some species, especially the katydids, those forewings will even actually be somewhat hardened to almost not quite like a carapace, but they're a little harder. Protect the body more. They're more of a protective layer than a flight layer, and that's true for a lot of the more terrestrial insects. That forewing, that upper wing, tends to be more of a hardened protective portion rather than a flight portion.
And the forewings are also known as tegmina. And their hind wings, so the second wings, are longer, more membranous, and veiny. And they're held folded fan-like at rest under the forewings. And that the last two segments of the abdomen are oftentimes reduced. And they have a single segmented soci.
So some of them, they have kind of a slightly pincher-like section, similar to how we talked about with the
earwigs.
The earwigs, yeah, but they're not as nowhere near as pronounced as the earwigs, and in many of them, they are adapted into more of a what is called an ovipositor. So it's actually a kind of like a little syringe-like organ that they use to deposit the eggs under the surface of like the dirt.
The ornithopterans have a polymetabolous life cycle, which means incomplete metamorphosis. They use sound during their courtship, so a lot of mating rituals involve using this sound that you hear, the chirping of crickets, and a lot of species have their own distinct sounds, or songs at least. Most grasshoppers lay their eggs in the ground or on vegetation. The eggs will hatch into young nymphs that resemble the adults but lack wings. These are often called the hoppers. And they also are oftentimes a lot differently colored than the adults. So the some I think that's called one that I can think of is like the adults are like a darker green, almost brown in color, whereas your larval stage is more of a uh, yellowish green, a lot lighter to mimic the vegetation color. And through these molts, they'll start to grow their wings until their final molt is the matured adult with fully developed wings. That will move us on into the next group, the grill. Oh boy, Alex. The Grilloblatoideae, also known as the ice bugs.
Yeah, or ice crawlers. So they're actually a family of extremophile insects. They are wingless. They live in cold areas like the top of mountains or even on the edges of glaciers. Um, there's only one member of the Grilloblatoidea, which it's typically considered like an order. But along with the order of Phasmatodea, which I believe is next on our list, are the rock crawlers. They're kind of a suborder. They have been considered suborders of the order Notoptera, but they, I believe, since have been separated into their own orders. As I said, they're wingless insects. They're typically less than 3 centimeters long, so like a quarter inch, I think is what that works out to be. They have typically long antennae and have an elongated cerci on the rear, arising from the tip of their abdomen. They are very intolerant to warmer temperatures. In fact, many species will die over 10 degrees Celsius, so that's only like 40 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And as well, because of this, they have most of the species have a very small distribution range. Typically nocturnal, feed on detritus, so decaying plant matter. As well as we said, they have these long antennae, between 20 and 50 segments on the antennae. You can see in the image here they have a number of different segments. And the cerci typically are segmented as well, like 5 to 10 segments. Their eyes are typically missing or greatly reduced. Of course, being nocturnal, they don't need them as much, and they have no ocelli. So those simple, kind of more just the light sensitive eyes, they typically do not have. As we said, it's its own order. It contains 5 genera and 34 extant species, so living species. And they, in those cold environments at those high elevations, you find them in leaf litter, under stones, those different areas where you find kind of that vegetation or decaying matter. On the opposite side, we said they're warm, intolerant to warmer temperatures. They're also intolerant to super cold temperatures. So their optimal range is like just above freezing, so 1 to 4 degrees Celsius, which is like 34 to 39 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's because at those colder temperatures, ice starts to form on their bodies, and they don't have a way to warm themselves the way that like mammals do, due to their internal body processes. So to survive when it snows, especially, they live kind of right near the soil layer under the snow pack. So they're still able to access the plant matter that fell in the autumn time, where before the snow occurred. And they also, because of that, they'll move probably up and down different elevations or to slightly warmer or slightly cooler areas depending on the season to maintain that optimal body temperature. So next, as I said, that similar grouping to these guys is Mantophasmatodea, which they're also known as gladiators. Kind of is a common term for them, but also rock crawlers, hill walkers, or mantophasmids. So they're kind of endemic to the South Africa and Namibia region of Africa. Let me pull these guys up real quick.
So these guys are wingless, even as adults. They are relatively difficult to identify compared to. They kind of resemble a lot of other things. Most typically a praying mantis and a phasmid, which I believe are like the aphids and stuff.
I believe so.
Um, but molecular evidence indicates they are most closely related to the Grillobotoidae, or those ice walkers. Um, they're wingless carnivores, and during courtship, they communicate using vibration transmitted to the ground or substrate.
So rather than the grasshoppers and crickets where they produce sound with their wings, they'll kind of vibrate along the ground, and those vibrations transmit to the other mantophasmids that are in the area, to especially if they're nearby to a member of the opposite sex, to kind of display that courtship between them to mate. But as we said, they're not well described because they're considered similar to other species that they are a more recently described group that requires some more research for sure, because they are in a small area in relation to most other insects. Um, as we said, most others are found worldwide, or at least in a much larger area than a couple countries in the southern part of Africa.
So that'll move us into our next group. Phasmatodidae, which I lied to you guys. Phasmids are stick bugs, not aphids. This is the group that contains stick insects, stick bugs, walking sticks, stick animals, or bug sticks. They're all the same thing, just with different names. Derived from the ancient Greek meaning phantom, referring to the resemblance to vegetation, while in fact being animals. So they have natural camouflage, being very sticky, or stick-like.
Yeah, they look like small twigs. Some actually look more like leaves. So I have an image pulled up here. One of the more stick-like ones, like we said, looks like a small, slender twig that would grow on any sort of woody vegetation. So bushes, trees, things like that. And then I'll pull up another image that is more of a leaf-like one. So they tend to be a little flatter, broader, like a leaf. Some look more like living leaves. They're like a green. I'm thinking of a mantis that is like very flowery colored, but there's
Yeah,
some.
that's yes, orchid mantis.
Yes, the orchid mantis, but that's different. So these guys, some are like that greener color, look more like living leaves. Some look more like dead leaves. It just depends on where they live in relation to. I'm sure the ones that look more like dead leaves are more on the forest floor, while the more stick-like and living leaf species would live up in the canopy of the different plants.
So they have that first line of defense being this incredible camouflage, oftentimes mimicking their environment. However, a lot of species still have a secondary line of defense, which could include a startle display, so getting big per se, raising themselves up, looking bigger, or they have spines or toxic secretions that make it more unpleasant to eat. Stick insects from the genera Ferganastrias, Tenomorpha, and
Fabaticus
include the world's longest insects. So not quite the biggest or heaviest, but the longest and antenna to tail length. Members are found on all continents except Antarctica, a common theme of the day, but most abundant in the tropics and subtropics. Also a common theme for the day. Oftentimes herbivorous, eating the plants they live on, with many species living unobtrusively in the tree canopy. They have an incomplete metamorphosis life cycle with 3 stages: the egg, the nymphal adult, and many are parthenogenic and do not require fertilized eggs for females to be produced. So a female can keep laying more females that hatch into other females that can go do parthenogenesis. Um, they can breed all year round. Um, a lot of times in more temperate regions, so around the weather we have around here, the stick bugs will uh, lay their eggs in the autumn, and then the mothers will die soon thereafter, most likely to cooling temperatures of the winter time. And the new generation will hatch in the spring. Uh, some species have wings and can disperse by flying, while others are more restricted. Um, as we were kind of alluding to, most of them have that cylindrical stick-like shape, with a couple that have flattened leaf-like shapes, similar to the one that we have on screen right now. Um, Many species are wingless or have reduced wings, and the thorax is long in the wing species, since it houses the flight muscles, and is typically much shorter in the wingless form. So a lot of times they'll have either a long thorax for the wings and a shorter abdomen, or a short thorax and a longer abdomen. Um, the first pair of wings is more narrow and hornified, or cornified, my bad. That's that forewing that we talked about, where a lot of times in these more restrictively flighted species is oftentimes hard, forms more of a carapace-like structure. Um, but the hind wings are broader, straight veined, and the wing venation occurs is unique among insects, often further modified to resemble vegetation, with ridges resembling leaf veins, bark-like tubercles, and other forms of camouflage. And a few species can even change their pigment to match their surroundings. Uh, Mouth parts project out from the head. Chewing mandibles are the most common mouth part. Uh, Legs are long and slender, as you can see in the image. Very long, very thin, not much meat on it, per se. Um, so some can shed their appendages autonomously, which means kind of like a self-defense mechanism, like lizards that lose their tails when they're in a predator-prey situation. Uh, these guys can shed off a appendage if they need. And in some species of phasmids, they have long antennae that are oftentimes just as long as the body, if not longer. Holy cow. Oh, there's a lot of insects to cover, boys and girls. Uh, so all phasmids possess compound eyes, but the ocelli are only known in about 5 groups. Of these, only the first 3 groups that I did not mention at all. Lanciocercata, Necrocinae, Pseudophasmatidae, um, have females with ocelli, which, like the wings, seem to re-evolve from ancestors that had lost them. So kind of re-evolved to possess them. That's going to cover our stick bugs and other similar insects. We will move into the Embioptera, also known as web spinners or foot spinners. I'll wait for Alex to pull a picture up.
Yep. Give me 1 second.
They're in that subclass of Pterygoda, with about 400 species and 11 families, originating back to the mid-Jurassic period.
There we go. Zoom this guy in. There you go. Yeah. So as Tyler said, that mid-Jurassic. They're all the species are very similar in appearance, kind of having that long, slender body, short legs, but only the males actually have wings. The females will not. Um, but the web spinners here, they are uh, gregarious. They kind of live in a subsocial uh, relation with what are called galleries. So like they're kind of
It's like a peanut gallery.
yeah, like peanut
It's like
galleries.
us.
Like just kind of little, like small kind of colony burrows that they often make with the silk they spin. That comes actually from glands on their forelegs, so different than other organisms, especially like the spiders that produce it from spinnerets at the end of the abdomen. And of course, these small colonies are typically related females and their offspring. While adult males, they don't feed once they become adults and typically die soon after mating. The females will live a bit longer to care for the young. And as we said, some species, the males will have wings and they're able to kind of fly around. It helps with genetic diversity, while the females do not and will remain near where they hatch. Um, However, the newly mated females will often will vacate the colony that they are born in and make a new one that is not too is fairly nearby, not too far away. So just kind of disperse a little bit, prevent too much genetic inbreeding. Um, and as well as in other cases, they'll emerge from those galleries to find new food sources, and they can actually extend the galleries to those portions. But typically, they stay close to the gallery where they are born at. So that will lead us then to another pretty big group, or I shouldn't say big group, but another popular group is a better term, which is Mantodea, or the mantids. So something that many people are familiar with across throughout the world.
Yeah. So
These are our praying mantises. So actually, I will pull up. Here we go, our orchid mantis. So I'll pull up two images. One of your typical praying mantis that most people are familiar with, and then our orchid mantis because they are just very cool looking.
right. So there's over 2,400 species and about 460 genera in 33 families. So pretty well divided taxonomically. Largest family is the Mantidae, which are the actual mantids. Mantids are distributed worldwide in temperate and tropical habitats. They have triangular heads, as you can kind of make out from this image, with big bulging eyes supported on flexible necks. Their elongated bodies may or may not have wings, depending on the species. Uh, but all Mantidae have four legs that are greatly enlarged and adapted for catching and gripping prey. So they use the rear two sets of legs for walking, and that front set is very well adapted for grabbing prey. Mantis shrimp kind of get their name from mantises, have a similar motion.
Yeah, there's some raptorial front legs, is the term used, which they said they use to catch their prey. They are carnivorous. Pretty much, I believe all species within this order are carnivorous, preying on things, typically other arthropods, insects, things like that, but as well as sometimes larger, especially on the very large mantid species, will actually catch even small birds if they're able to overpower them and eat them. But they said they have this very upright posture. So when they stand still and they have the forearms folded up, is why they're typically called the praying mantis because of the way their arms curl in. But they're close relatives of the termites and cockroaches genetically. And sometimes they can be confused with those stick insects or grasshoppers, but they are kind of distantly related. They are their own unique grouping.
They are ambulatories, typically, but a few ground-dwelling species are found as active predators, oftentimes pursuing their prey. They live for about a year in cooler climates. The adults lay their eggs in the autumn, and then they die. Uh, the eggs have a hard capsule before they emerge in the springtime. And in some species, you famously exhibit sexual cannibalism. So you'll mate, your male and female will mate, and then shortly after mating, the female will consume the male.
Yeah. So as we said, they have those large triangular heads. They kind of have like a beak-like snout almost. It comes to that point with pronounced mandibles. They have two very large compound eyes, and then as well three smaller simple eyes, and of course a pair of antennae. The neck is able to move very well. They're very flexible, where some species of mantis can actually rotate their heads a full 180 degrees, so they can turn one way and pretty much look the entire way behind them. The thorax actually consists of kind of three distinct parts: the prothorax, mesothorax, and metathorax. In the genus Mantoida, the prothorax bears the head and the forelegs, is typically much longer, as well as it can be flexible, kind of articulated, allowing a lot of movement for the head and the forelimbs, while the rest of the body is more immobile. Um, and they're also unique in the sense that they kind of have uh, a tympanum that has like a small auditory chamber within that metathorax, so that kind of rear section of the thorax. However, most mantises can only hear in ultrasound, so that'd be um, the range of sound that is above the hearing of uh, humans, so higher frequency. Yeah.
Right. Moving on here, as we said, they have those raptorial legs, which they use to keep the prey held securely as they feed. Uh,
Typically, kind of spiky to help grip.
right. Their compound eyes have up to 10,000 ommatidia, which gives them their stereo vision. Um, which I'm trying to remember what stereo vision. That's the full spectrum,
Uh,
or is it the kaleidoscope vision?
I think it's more. Let me pull it up here real quick. Um, so yeah, it kind of gives them that binocular vision. They're able to see.
Depth.
Yeah, they can actually see three. They can see three dimensions, as well as that. Okay, so that stereo. They kind of actually see two images from each eye separately that then kind of are mixed together. That's kind of what that stereo vision means.
They have a small area at the front called the fovea, and that actually has the greatest visual acuity compared to the rest of the eye, and produce a high resolution image when necessary to examine their prey. Uh, the peripheral ommatidia are really, in terms of used for seeking motion. Um, when they see motion, the head is rapidly rotated to bring that into the view of the fovea. So they'll see the motion, flick their head to really get a general idea if it's predator or prey or uh, inconvenience or whatever.
Yeah. And as we said, they're typically generalist predators of other arthropods. There's ambush predators that they will only feed on live prey, though. So um, some folks have heard the mantids are often kept as pets. They actually must be fed like live prey. They they will not eat a already dead organism. Um, and to do that, uh, for that ambush, they will camouflage themselves, especially the ones that are either green, camouflage like other vegetation, and they will remain stationary until prey approaches them, or they will uh, stalk it very slowly, kind of slow, stealthy movements um, to reach that prey. And like we said, some of the larger mantises will eat smaller individuals of the other mantises, as well as even those small vertebrates that we talked about, like lizards, frogs, fish, or even small birds. So real quick before we go on, I will as well show. I've been showing the typical praying mantis that most people are familiar with, but I will share that orchid mantis as well, just because they're very cool looking. They look like a flower. They're very pink. The abdomen kind of curls up the way the leaf of a flower would. Um, these ones will prey on a lot of pollinators, like those flying insects. They're native to more tropical areas. There's many species of these that will uh, mimic different colors of flowers,
Yeah.
things like that.
So they're like rear abdomen parts, their hind legs kind of resemble the shape of an orchid flower, and that they kind of lure their prey in, whether it be bees or flies or beetles or whatever pollinators in the area, and they'll trap them as they come in to pollinate. That'll lead us into our next order, uh, Latidea. I'm having issues reading today too. This is the cockroaches and termites, as we kind of alluded to, with our mantises being close relatives. Um, so termites are a relatively new addition So this order, they used to be their own separate order, but genetically they're closely related to cockroaches. So now they are within the same order, um, which means that they have evolved from the cockroaches. So statistically, they're also cockroaches. Alex is working on pulling up a picture of a cockroach while I ramble. Um, they're also considered part of that superorder Dictyoptera. Um, there's about 4,400 species of cockroach and almost 500 genera, and about 3,000 species of termites and 300 genera. Alex, you want to talk about termites real quick?
Yeah, so real quick, let me I pulled up an image of a cockroach. Let me pull up the termites real quick before I go on to talk about them, just because I want you to see what we're talking about while we're talking about it. Makes sense. So your termites, of course, very pale colored, soft bodies. They are actually is the term eusocial, so they live in large colonies. Um, and of course, your cockroaches are typically the darker, kind of brown colors with a lot of different segments. Um, in the colonies, termites, of course, they actually have what is called a caste system. So there are different levels of within the colony. Of course, there's the reproductive pair, the king and queen. The queen being very large with a very pronounced abdomen. She really is sessile. Well, her only job is to lay eggs. And the king, of course, his job is to fertilize the eggs, which uh, you'll have one queen will mate with many kings over her lifetime um, to produce a lot of different.
Could you imagine being a king?
I mean, yeah, his only job is to live long enough to fertilize the eggs, and
That
that's
sounds like a
really it.
sick gig.
Yeah, it'd be a pretty good gig because you don't have to do a whole lot. And then as well below that, there are numerous sterile, so non-reproductive workers and soldiers. Of course, the workers are the ones that most people typically would think of when you see a termite, like the image on the screen. They have the long bodies with the pronounced head, and they have chewing mandibles that allow them to chew, especially woody debris. When most people think of termites, they think of them inhabiting uh, wood, especially in houses where they cause problems. And they, of course, they find food, care for the young, care for the queen as well. And then the soldiers typically have larger heads with larger mandibles that they use to fight invaders, whether it be different predators, other termite colonies, things like that. Um, and of course, your cockroaches are not colonial, but they have a tendency to live in groups. So kind of be like a pre-social where they don't uh, cooperate the way that termites do, but they will be in groups. Um, but all the adults are capable of breeding. And they do follow those social behaviors. They'll follow the trail pheromones, which are different chemicals that are released by the bodies that the other organisms are able to follow using their sensory organs, and they recognize their relatives, and they use other different forms of communications.
So there's over 4,000 different species of cockroaches found in every corner of the globe, with each continent having its own indigenous species. Most of these are omnivorous or detrivores, uh, live in a range of habitats like leaf litter, rotting wood, thick vegetation, crevices, cavities beneath bark, under logs, and among other debris. Some are arboreal, some live in caves, and some are aquatic. I'm not too familiar with the aquatic cockroaches,
No,
but I
but
know about like the Madagascar hissing cockroach. That's an arboreal species, lives in trees. They're massive.
they're very large and they're very loud. They make a large kind of hissing sound by rubbing I believe by clicking their abdomen. Um,
Yeah, it's kind of segmented in a way that they can move it to make noise,
yeah.
a clicking sound.
But for all these thousands of species of cockroaches, there's actually only a small number that live in close proximity to humans that are considered like pests, as we would consider the cockroaches.
The most common one that we think of when we think of pests, like the German cockroach, I believe, is the big one. spreads disease through its feces in close proximity to humans. It can lead to sickness and illness.
Yeah. But a lot of species of cockroach, because they are detritivores or omnivores feeding on vegetation, they'll either harbor symbionts, so small, most likely bacteria within their gut, um, to help facilitate digestion of the cellulose, which is the sugar within the plant matter that helps build like the cell walls of the plant, which is something we can get into when we talk about plants. Other species produce enzymes that help digest that cellulose, so they don't have those symbionts. They're able to specialize in consuming that plant matter.
So there's about 3,000 species of termite found in all continents except Antarctica. So I guess that means there's cockroaches on Antarctica.
Uh, I don't know. I don't know if it's said.
They have the greatest diversity is found in Africa. Relatively few species inhabit Europe and North America. They're also detritivores, and many species eat wood. Similar to cockroaches having that similar gut protozoa and other bacteria that help them to digest the cellulose. They have soft bodies and keep out of sight as far as possible. You know, they're soft bodied. They try to avoid any type of predator. Um, they can loosely be subdivided into damp wood, dry wood, and subterranean types, although that's not the typical subdivision. In general, damp wood termites inhabit coniferous forests, dry wood termites inhabit hardwood forests, and subterranean termites live in a wide variety of habitats. Um, Termites are eusocial, as we said, with that caste system. Kind of already explained what that was earlier. So some of the similar behaviors that they exhibit, we covered a couple of them. So they have like a similar attraction to like warm, humid, damp environments. Um, a thigmotaxis, which is like touch order. So they'll like just do wall following. Um, so like they'll hit something and then they'll just keep following that until they hit the next wall. That's how they kind of direct themselves. Um,
Yeah. But to answer Tyler's question from before as well, the cockroaches, they are actually found even in very cold, like the Arctic. Um, I'm not sure about as much Antarctica as possible, because there's some species that are capable of surviving temperatures of up to minus 122 degrees Celsius, or almost minus 190 degrees Fahrenheit, because within themselves they are able to manufacture through their own processes kind of an antifreeze made of glycerol within the body that prevents their bodies from freezing. So something cockroaches, and I'm sure many people have heard the kind of statement that cockroaches are almost unkillable. They're able to survive a lot of different things, including very hot, very cold temperatures, high amounts of radiation, especially like nuclear radiation, as well as even some can survive being pretty much being squished. When people see, they're able to be compacted to very small, um, like they're able to be compacted very small and still survive without, as long as it doesn't break the exoskeleton, they'd be able to survive. So that's why even sometimes when people squish them, they may still seem to be they'll still be alive because they actually can be squished without dying.
so other similarities they have beyond similar habitat likeness and uh, touch sensory is they burrow. Uh, Hygienic behaviors, they're often seen grooming themselves. Um, Food sharing, so oftentimes the workers will bring back food for the whole colony and termites or the whole social group for cockroaches. Um, Cannibalism, so in, in difficult times, they will eat each other. Vibrational communication, kin recognition, trail following, Alex talked about it already. Uh, Brood care, antenna cropping, Um, Most of the other things we already covered in terms of these two groups. Alex, I think it's time for a break.
I believe it may be time for us to take a quick break. We still have a pretty fair chunk of our insects to go. We have not even gotten to the beetles yet, which are a massive group. So I think we are going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. I don't know if you just want to.
Can you stop?
I don't know if I can stop it. Yeah.
Welcome back, everybody.
Took a quick break.
Took a quick
We're in
break.
good shape. A little stretch. We are back. As we said, we just left off from the order Blattodia, which is our cockroaches and termites. Now we're moving to a little smaller group. Is the order Socodia, which is the bark lice, book lice, and parasitic lice. So when you think of like hair lice, head lice, this is these guys.
Those are insects. That's news to me. I thought they were arachnids. Not gonna lie to you.
Okay.
Formerly considered a superorder, but is now generally considered by entomologists as an order. Despite the greatly different appearance of parasitic lice, they are believed to have evolved from the former order Socodia, which contained the bark lice and book lice, now found to be paraphyletic, and all paraphyletic means is their least common ancestor, but not all of the descendant images. Alex, pull up a picture of a louse.
Yes.
Most primitive of the hemipteroids.
Hemipteroids?
Hemorrhoids.
Yeah.
Socodia contains around 11,000 species divided among 4 suborders and 70 families. And they're about 1 to 10 millimeters in length, so about 5/100th of an inch to 4/10ths of an inch.
Very small.
So book lice received their common name because they are commonly found among old books. Wow. Real original there, guy.
They calls them like they sees them.
Yeah. They feed upon the paste in the bindings of old books. And bark lice are found in trees. Once again, good name.
Yeah.
Calling how you see them. Feeding on algae and lichen. Not sure if we covered what a lichen is, but a lichen is kind of a commensal species of a moss and
Or like
fungus.
moss or an algae, fungus. So some sort of producer with a fungus that kind of live together. Very often found on the bark of trees or on rocks. They get very low growing. Something we'll talk about at some point. We'll go into depth with them.
Especially when we get to
the fungi.
The fungi and succession.
Yes, yeah. Well, we may do an episode on succession, especially when we get to plants, just because it's a very important plant process.
Right.
As well as geological process. But back to the sokids, they, of course, says small scavenging insects. Pretty generalized body plan, as you can see in the image. Head, thorax, abdomen, kind of flattened dorsoventrally, so top to bottom.
Smooshed.
Yeah, not, as we said, not very big. They have the antennae are actually kind of closer to their mouth, and the mouth is kind of modified. So they have chewing mandibles, so those outer parts are those larger mandibles, but then that middle part of the maxilla, which is like that slightly inner mouth, kind of modified into more like a rod shape, which they use to brace against whatever they're eating, as it uses those mandibles to scrape like the detritus or whatever else they're eating off of the surface. They have kind of a swollen forehead, so that upper part of the head is a bit larger. Big compound eyes with 3 ocelli. We said those are their simple eyes. They have soft bodies with a segmented abdomen, as you can see in the image. And then there are actually some species that can spin a silk from glands in their mouth. and they may actually festoon. I forget what festoon means. If you want to look that up real quick, but large sections of like trunks and branches. So I'm in dense swaths of silk. So I'm guessing it's like a kind of overrun. What is festoon?
Festoon is a chain or garland. Oh,
Like adorn. So they will cover the bark or leaves with that silk. Um, and many of these have small ovipositors that are about 1.5 times as long as their hind wings. So they do have small hind wings or small wings, but these wings have a pretty simple venation pattern. If they're even present, they kind of have them tent-like over the body. And of course, they have small, slender legs that are adapted for jumping in some species, more than rather than gripping, like the true lice. Um, and of course, the abdomen has 9 segments. So we said they're segmented, but they have no cerci. So most of that is, um, yeah, it's just the abdomen. They kind of like the crawling, jumping, especially um, the bark and book lice that move a lot. The parasitic lice, like the head lice, are a bit more. Their legs are fashioned a bit more for gripping. Um, but that will lead us then into one of the biggest groups of the insects, which is Hemiptera.
these are your true bugs, comprising of 80,000 species. These are the groups like cicadas, aphids, plant hoppers, leaf hoppers, assassin bugs, bed bugs, and shield bugs. Huge group, very diverse from your tiny pest aphids that eat plants,
Good
plant
choice.
hoppers, leaf hoppers, or sapsucker insects. Kind of resemble like a spiny, like a spine on a plant or something like that, as camouflage. But they range in size from about a millimeter, so that 500th of an inch, to about 15 centimeters or 6 inches. Um, and most of them have a common piercing slash sucking up mouth part.
So it's kind of like a proboscis, but it's typically like a hard kind of syringe-like, which they use to feed primarily the hemiptera. They feed on plants, like you said, those kind of piercing, sucking mouth parts. They pierce plant matter, specifically like the leaves, the softer plant matter, and suck out the sap. But there are some blood-sucking um,
Bed bugs,
bugs,
assassin
like
bugs.
yeah, as well as some that are predatory, like the assassin bugs, stink bugs, so the shield bugs, so stink bugs. They are predatory,
Oh, yeah.
and they will, I believe so, yeah, and they will use that to feed on other insects and actually even some small and other invertebrates. It's not just insects, but they live in a wide variety of habitats, typically terrestrial, so land-based. However, there are some that have adapted to live in or on freshwater areas. So think of like your pond skaters, the little bugs that just
Float on top of the
yeah,
water.
they're just on top of the water, as well as the water boatmen and giant water bugs, which live underwater. Um,
Very cool.
they're very cool, especially the giant water bugs. They have a very large front forelimb that they use to grasp things, even like small fish. I've actually seen them grasp. Where they kind of have like more of like a point. They come to a point they use to penetrate the skin or the exoskeleton of their prey. Apparently, it actually hurts quite a lot, and they're sometimes known as toe biters. Um, it's supposed to be somewhat painful, but hemipterans are also hemimetabolists, which means they have that kind of 3-stage metamorphosis where the young nymphs resemble the adults. However, there are some that typically sexual reproduction. However, there are some that, especially the aphids, that are able to reproduce parthenogenetically, so the unfertilized eggs are able to hatch, which allows them to reproduce extremely quickly in favorable conditions, which, especially on some plants, actually causes pretty serious infestations that will kill the plants. As we said, that defining feature is that beak-like, almost call it like a stylet or that syringe, um, which kind of is sheathed with a modified labium or like lip structure to kind of protect it in some cases. Of course, piercing those tissues, and then when they pierce that, they will actually channel saliva outward to. They actually have two channels within it. Sorry, that some of it brings out that saliva, which has those digestive enzymes, kind of pre-digest the food, and then the other channel intakes that liquid food after it partially digested.
It's called the sebareal pump.
Yeah, so there's like a little pump within the mouth region that helps suck that food into the body.
And both the motion of extruding saliva and intaking digestive juices are powered by this dilator muscle in the head, in that mouth region. The beak is usually folded under the body when not in use. It's just the diet is typically plant sap, but the assassin bugs and shield bugs and things like that are predators.
Yes. So, as far as the body plan, the forewing, so that upper wing, is typically completely a membrane. So, like in the cicada, you can see in the bottom right picture that common cicada, both set pairs of wings are membranes. However, in a lot of the other ones, they are partially hardened, like in the shield bugs, to kind of, or in the plant hoppers, to kind of protect that those underwings that are typically a bit larger that are used for flying. Many of them are able to produce sound from communication, like the most common one, the cicadas. Many people are familiar with those. Produce that very loud, kind of screeching sound.
Speaking of cicadas, this is a big year for cicadas.
Yeah, this year is a big year. So there are many different species of cicadas, but many people are familiar with the periodical cicada or the pharaoh cicada. There are two types. There's 13-year and 17-year. And in the American Midwest this year, two of those groups overlapped at the same time. So they call them different broods. They number them. They number them for the years, so they can differentiate those different years of the cycle. But a group, one brood of 13-year and one brood of 17-year, are hatching both this year, causing a very large hatch, which would be very loud because cicadas, they are the loudest of any insect, which many people are familiar with. They have these tympanoid organs on the underside of the abdomen, which of course are used to attract mates. They're kind of like this disc-like drum on the cuticle, which are clicked in and out, similar, if many folks know, like the metal lid on some jars, especially those that are canned, like jams, that you push down on the lid and kind of clicks. Same idea.
On your preserving jars, the metal lid, you can pop the preservation button up and down. Produces a clicky sound.
Yeah, especially once it's opened, it releases the pressure within it, or the vacuum within it. Of course, the hemipterans are hemimetabolists, so they go that incomplete metamorphosis. Many of the nymphs look more or less like adults, as we talked about with the instars for the spotted lanternfly, because they are plant hoppers. You can see in this image here, the bottom center is the European lanternfly, so similar to the spotted lanternfly, but a little different, native to Europe, a bit smaller, different coloration, but those plant hoppers. And as they grow, they get larger, and a lot of times as the instars go, they
develop their wings.
Yeah, the wings develop to those different. They get larger until that adult stage, and then the wings are fully formed at that point. But we already talked about the aphids being partially parthenogenic, so they make clones of themselves, but they also do have sexual reproduction. There's advantages to each, and there are actually some aphids that are viviparous, which means they give birth to live young, which also aids the aphids in creating those very large hatches at one time. They're able to reproduce very, very quickly.
Aphids are among the top pests to farmers and any type of gardener out there.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about it later on when we get to Coleoptera.
Yeah. And of course, hemipterans, like we talked about, a lot of ways they can move around, swimming, and water, skating on the water surface, as well as they jump and fly. Especially in the plant hoppers, they jump a lot, and they'll kind of fly to uh, a new surface where they'll walk. And then just the regular walking and flying you see in like the shield bugs and the cicadas. That will move us on to our next group, another kind of one of the smaller groupings, not quite as small as some of the others, which is Thysanoptera, also known as the thrips.
So thrips are minute, mostly a millimeter long, slender insects with fringed wings and uniquely asymmetrical mouth parts, which I'm assuming means that one mandible is larger than the other mandible.
Probably.
Which is weird, you think, because they're bilaterally symmetrical. They've described about 7,700 species. They have weak flight due to their fringed wings. Uh, and their wings are feathery too in appearance. So they exploit clap and flame to create lift using an unsteady circulation pattern with transient vortices near the wings. So they kind of like
As they fly, it's a very unsteady flight.
like a couple super flaps and then nothing, and then they'll build back energy to do a couple more super flaps. They are functionally diverse, with nearly half of the known species being fungivores. Um, a small portion of these 7,000 species are pests to important crops, and others serve as about vectors to about 20 viruses for plant disease, especially the Tosca virus. Sort of the Tosca virus. Could you please explain?
That is
It's an RNA virus.
it is an RNA virus in plants. Not really. Yeah, a lot of them that cause spotting and wilting in plants, as well as reduced output and depth. They affect a lot of the plant families, specifically food crops like peanuts, watermelons, tomatoes, zucchini, things of that nature, peppers, and then different flowers. So, pretty widespread grouping of viruses.
So a lot of the flower-dwelling thrips bring in pollinators, uh, and some predatory thrips are small feed on other small insects like or even mites. Uh, Unfortunately, if there's you can have a massive thrip outbreak in a greenhouse uh, where invasive species can increase and form large swarms because of any natural predators in the greenhouse. And they're able to reproduce asexually, which means they don't have to mate; they can just keep laying eggs and hatching, which leads them to be a massive pest. And they can even aggregate in household objects like furniture, bedding, and computer monitors.
Yeah. Um, like many of the other ones, they are that hemimetabolite, that incomplete metamorphosis. They have that very in the image like a cigar-shaped body plan, so kind of that longer, slender kind of cylinder that comes to a point on either end. Um, and of course, you said they are kind of that long, ranging in size from 0.5 to 14 millimeters. So like 2/100ths of an inch to about half an inch in length for some of the larger ones that are more predatory, but the vast majority are about 1 millimeter in length. So pretty small. We said the wings are folded back along the body, as you can see in the top left image. Um, and actually, many of them have on the end of their legs, they have two little segments that have a small bladder-like structure that allows them to walk on vertical surfaces. A little different than some of the other insects, where it's more like the little grabby hairs that help connect it to the surface. Of course, they have compound eyes with a relatively small number of the omatidia, which are like the little segments within the compound eye, and then the three ocelli on the head, which are pretty typical within the
Insects.
insects.
A lot of them have that through your celly helps a lot, as we discussed with polarized light, navigation, and orientation.
Yeah. And lastly, we said there's asymmetrical mouth parts, which is unique to this group. Typically, the right mandible, the one side, is very reduced.
It's vestigial, which means like not used anymore.
Yeah.
Like our appendixes are vestigial organs.
Yeah, and in some cases it's actually completely gone. But however, the left mandible is used kind of to cut into food, the food that they eat, especially plants, to where saliva is injected, and the little stylets of the maxillae are inserted to uh, ingest those uh, the fluid that is uh, from the partially digested saliva. And then in many cases, especially on plants, it ruptures the plant cell, leaving like a silvery bronze scarring on the leaves of the surface in plants where they have fed. This will lead us then into one of our larger groups of insects, which is Hymenoptera, which is your sawflies, wasps, bees, and ants.
It's probably the third or fourth largest grouping.
I believe so. It is one of the larger.
So these are your sawflies, wasps, bees, and ants. A lot of those eusocial organisms that we discussed earlier form the colonies. There's about 150,000 living species described, in addition to 2,000 or so extinct ones. Many of these species are actually parasitic, which is news to me.
Yeah. Probably like plant parasites, if I had to guess.
I'd guess that too. Females typically have a special ovipositor for inserting eggs into hosts or places that are otherwise inaccessible. The ovipositor is often modified into a stinger, similar to a lot of wasps, bees, hornets have those stingers.
As well as many ants as well.
Yes, although I'm more familiar with the ants using their mandibles.
Yeah, it depends. Some species of ants do have that stinger, as well as the larger mandibles that they can bite with. It just depends on the species. There's one ant species called the bullet ant that is native to the tropics, I believe in South America, which is supposed to have one of the most painful stings of all insects.
Correct. I've heard that as well. The young develop through holometabolism, which is a complete metamorphosis, as they have a worm-like larval stage. So when you think of like honeybees in the hive, some of those combs are actually used for their larval stages, and they're fed nectar, or what are they? Royal jelly.
Yeah, well, it depends. Yeah, different, like typically partially digested food that the workers will then feed to them. The royal jelly, especially in the more colonized, like the bees and the ants, that is to produce a queen. Especially, it's well known in the bees that produce the honey. That royal jelly is kind of a separate part from the honey that promotes development into the queen bee, which, of course, they are the ones that are sexually reproductive. Typically, the rest are sterile, especially in the bees, ants colonizing wasps. However, there are solitary bees that just live on their own. They lay their eggs in kind of small crevices, tubules, as well as there are some wasps that are, like I said, parasitic. The parasitic wasps, they'll actually lay their eggs on especially caterpillars. So if you ever see a caterpillar that has a whole lot of white protrusions on it, typically little cylinders, those are actually wasp eggs that have been laid, and the larvae will then burrow into the caterpillar, kill it, and eat it before they develop into the adults.
Right. So once they go through that one like larval stage, they'll develop a pupa stage, oftentimes in the same area.
Yeah.
Since these are colonizing insects, they typically have people that not only watch over the pupa or the larva, but yeah, they watch over both of them at the same time. Have a nursery area per se, and then they'll hatch from that pupae into a worker, soldier, or however.
Yeah.
From there, they have They can either be very small or very large. So some of the smaller ants you can think of. Fire ants are pretty small, compared to like the what's the one wasp thing that
The Japanese giant hornet, which is very large, a few inches in size,
yeah.
and of course the range all in between them. Typically, that kind of inch,
There's
half inch,
yeah.
inch
There's a
kind of
wasp I'm
range.
thinking of though that is very large and it has like a scorpion-like tail. It's a parasitic wasp. Like it starts with an eye and I'm forgetting the name of it, but it's very cool. Um, what is that here? Oh, they have mouth parts for chewing with well-developed mandibles. Many species have further developed their mouth parts into lengthy proboscis. So some of the bee species, I believe, have that proboscis, which they can get the nectar out of
Yeah.
because they're pollinators, so they'll kind of accidentally pollinate while getting the nectar out. Um, they have large compound eyes, and they typically have those three simple ocelli like other insects. Um, among most hymenopterans, sex is determined by the number of chromosomes an individual possesses. Fertilized eggs get two sets of chromosomes and develop into diploid females, while unfertilized eggs only contain one set into haploid males. So those are the sterile ones that we're talking about. The act of fertilization is under the voluntary control of the egg-laying female, giving her control of the sex of her offspring. This phenomenon is called haploid.
Haplodiploidy.
Right, that one.
Yeah. So typically, you think, especially mammals, the or a lot of your chordates, the sex is determined either in reptiles by temperature, but especially your mammals, it's determined by a specific chromosome um, that is different. So, in thinking humans, you have the sex chromosomes. You have either two X's, which is for female, or an X and a Y, which is for males. However, these it's actually the numbers. So you either have two sets of chromosomes. Typically, in humans you have 23 pairs. So in the ants you'd have however many of the pairs, but in the those are from the fertilized eggs. However, the males only have the single set, so they wouldn't have a pairing. They'd only have one. Um, so half the typical number for a fertilized egg.
So the suborder Symphyta includes the sawflies, horntails, and parasitic wood wasps. This group may be paraphyletic, as it has been suspected in the family. Urucidae may be the group from which the uh, Apocrypha arose. They have an unconstricted junction between the thorax and the abdomen. The larvae are herbivorous, free living in a ruciform.
Okay, so the Apocrypha is you think of the wasps and the ants, that very narrow uh, section between the thorax and the abdomen. That's what the Apocrypha is.
They have three pairs of true legs, prolegs on every segment, um, and the ocelli. The prolegs do not have crochet hooks at the ends, unlike the larvae of the Lepidoptera. The legs and prolegs tend to be reduced or absent in larvae that mine or board plant tissue, as well as in the larvae of Pamphilidae, which is
Uh, it is a small family that lives in the temperate regions of the northern hemisphere. They feed on plants like conifers, so they're kind of like leaf miners, or they'll roll up the leaves or kind of spin like a silk web or tent.
so the waspies and ants together make up the suborder Apocrypha, which is characterized by a constriction between the first and second abdominal segments called the petiole, the petiole. Um, also involving the fusion of the first abdominal segment to the thorax. Also, the larvae of all Apocrypha lack legs, prolegs, or ocelli. The hindgut of the larvae also remains closed during development, with feces being stored inside the body, with the exception of some bee larvae where the larvae anus has reappeared to development and reversion. In general, the anus only opens at the completion of larval growth. So once it kind of pupates, then the feces kind of excretes. Um, and as Alex had in the chart that is now since disappeared, um, you can split this group even further um, into the waspies and ants. The wasps are that group in Vespidae, What do you think? Like Vespa is wasp. Uh, Apidae, which are your bees, which further separate into Apis and Bombus. And the Formicidae are your ants, which group into Myrmecia and Solenopsis, which I don't quite understand the difference between those two, but I'm sure if you guys want, we can get into an episode focusing on Hymenoptera and separating it, going deeper down.
They're probably just different families or genus within the order. Or I'd say probably Formicidae is probably the family, and then those are different genus within the family.
We'll go with that. But that'll lead us into our next group.
They're kind of funky.
The Strepsiptera. And the order of insects with 11 extant families that include about 600 species. They are endoparasites of other insects such as bees, wasps, leafhoppers, silverfish, and cockroaches. Most of the time, the females of the species never emerge from the host after entering the body, finally dying inside it. The early stage larvae do emerge because they must find an unoccupied living host, and the short-lived males must emerge to seek a receptive female in her host.
So the image on the screen, I believe, is actually a male probably fertilizing. The female is the smaller, that kind of section you can see underneath there. That'd be the female. Let me show you another image that would show the attached females within some sort of bee or wasp. Kind of underneath the segment, those small kind of protrusions that are under the segment, kind of the exoskeleton area, would actually be your Strepsiptera, most likely the females.
So these are believed to be the most common relative of beetles, so Coleoptera, which they diverged about 300 to 350 million years ago. So this is this is sometime during the Mesozoic, I believe.
I believe so.
But don't really appear in the fossil record until the mid-Cretaceous period, around 100 million years ago. The order is not well known to non-specialists, and the nearest they have to a common name is Stylops. So there's not really much outside of like a specialist for these guys, which is referencing the genus Stylops within this group, which translates to twisted wing. You can't, as the females don't really emerge from the host, the males have that kind of twisted wings, not too straight per se. The males have wings, legs, eyes, and antennae. Though their mouthparts cannot be used for feeding, they have them. Many have mouthparts modified into sensory structures. Although a lot of the time the males look a lot like flies.
And a lot of this comes from as well. Their forewings, those front wings, are actually modified into very small, kind of club-like structures called halteres, which are used kind of for orientation, like a gyroscope. Help them kind of orient themselves as something that is very well known in the order of flies, which we'll get to here in a little while. However, in the flies, it's the hind wings that are modified instead of the forewings. So it's kind of, they independently evolved structures. And of course, the hind wings are the general fan shape with a lot of venation, and the antennae are flabellate, which I believe are kind of like a flattened.
They're not so much filaments like stringy. They're more like
so they're kind of longer, but the ends kind of, those last few segments of the antennae kind of fan out into some like a flattened structure.
Like feathery. The adult males have eyes unlike any other insect, resembling the eyes found in the trilobite group Phacopoena. Would you mind pulling up that picture again? I was meaning of the male.
Oh, the male. Yes, sorry.
Instead of the compound eyes that are typical of most insects. The Strepsipteran eyes consist of only a few dozen eyelets that each produce a complete image. yeah, you can kind of see in this image that they have like a false compound eye. It looks like one almost, but it's not. If I'm seeing this right.
Yeah, so it's a kind of a different way the compound eyes are constructed.
Um, so in the compound eyes, each uh, Ommatidia produces like one pixel out of the image, whereas in each of these um, islets, they produce a complete image. And each are separated by a cuticle or setae, giving the cluster eye a blackberry-like appearance.
So the females, like we said, they're fairly small, kind of lack wings, legs, or eyes. They pretty much inhabit the host that they live on and stay there. They have a well sclerotized cephalothorax, so this is one of the few species within the insects that actually fuse that head and thorax region. Um, and of course, like we said, they are wingless. However, there are some in a couple families that are free living. They actually do have small legs and small eyes, but the vast majority of them are parasites on these other insects, as well as the larvae. When they first hatch, they're very small, about 230 micrometers, so 1/128th of an inch, so incredibly small, which is actually even smaller than many single-celled organisms, some of the larger single-celled organisms. But they are very, very mobile, um, and they can actually distinguish things like color. However, the underside of the body is covered in very tiny hair-like structures that allow them to stick to wet surfaces, and they at the back have large bristle-like cerci that allow them to jump. Um, but the tarsal segment of the legs also have those kind of structures that allow them to cling to whatever their host is. And typically, the later instars will develop inside the host, and they become completely immobile. The virgin females will actually release a pheromone, which allows the males to locate them, since the females do not move, but the males do. And the species, or some species, are polyandrous, which means the female will mate with multiple males within her lifetime. So that will then lead us to our largest order of the insects, which is Coleoptera, or the beetles.
Right. So the beetles are the largest uh, order within insect, or fam. Is it order? We on orders?
Yeah.
Yes. Order within the insects. Um, their front pair of wings are hardened to wing cases called elytra, which distinguishes them from most, because a lot of times the forewings in other species are semi-hardened. These ones are completely hardened. Um, there's about 400,000 described species, which is nearly half of all the insects. Right?
Yeah, so yeah,
There's
little less than half, so about 40% of all the insects. But there's estimated to be about 1 to 2 million species that actually exist. Like I said when we first started, there are over a million species with so many that we have yet to describe, because they are small and so widespread, especially in tropical regions where it's difficult to find them, and new species are being formed and die off every day before we even have a chance to describe them.
Right. So as Alex said, there's about 40% of all. The beetles comprise about 40% of all insects. That's about 25% of all described species.
Yes.
Uh, in the animal world. Uh, there's about an estimate for about 2.1 million species here. I don't know if you said that one.
I did not. Yeah, like 1 to 2 million. So
they're found everywhere except for the sea and polar regions, and they're major role players in the ecosystems, being anywhere from detritivores to herbivores to carnivores. Some are pests, like the acorn weevil or the Colorado potato beetle, uh, and others, like ladybugs, eat some of the other pests we talked about already, like aphids, thrips, scale insects, um, And some have completely unique roles, like fireflies, who have a large light emitting organ on the back of their abdomen for communication and mating purposes. Um, as I said, they had that large elytra, hardened forewings.
But even the rest of the exoskeleton, and a lot of them, is particularly hard, especially in the larger organisms. So they are a bit tougher than some of the other insects. Some of them, like blister beetles, it's a bit softer, but in general, they are very have a very hard exoskeleton there, so they're well protected. They typically have a fairly general anatomy, kind of an oval shape with the head, thorax, and abdomen fairly well distinguished between them. Um, and of course, they differentiate. And some have very large pincers, some have smaller, more like the weevils have more of that stylet kind of mouth part, and then a lot of different things in between. But even some have adaptations like water beetles that allow them to create air bubbles to live within the water. They do go through a complete metamorphosis, so they have that abrupt change between larvae and adult. Many of the larvae are what we would call grubs. They live within the soil or within other plants. Um, then they grow, like the emerald ash borer is a beetle, where the larvae, which is kind of worm-like, lives within the under the bark, like right at the intersection of the bark and the wood layer within the ash tree, and then it exits the bark to where it pupates and then becomes the adult beetle.
Um, so many have sexual dimorphism. So a lot of times the male beetle will have larger mandibles than the female, and it'll show a lot of times they'll use those large mandibles in males to fight for mates, similar to deer and other larger mammals.
So, like the stag beetle, the rhinoceros beetle, have very well pronounced pincers. Or the rhinoceros beetle, I believe it is is a rostrum
Yeah,
that develops.
it's a rostrum that they have, or a similar thing to a rostrum.
Yeah.
And some are even aposematic. Bright, they have bright coloration to kind of distinguish that, hey, don't eat me. I'm non-palatable.
Yeah, typically that aposematism, those bright colorations, typically warn predators that they are poisonous, and some have some sort of excretion that makes them very unpalatable. And they also have, a lot of them have mimicry. There are some that actually even look like either like different plants or other unpalatable species.
Yeah, it's called Batesian mimicry, and that's when that's when you look similar to an insect that you're or an organism that you're not.
Correct.
We'll get to it later. The hoverflies, which are like sweat bees, it's a more common name for them.
Yeah, they look very similar to bees, but they are in fact not bees.
Yeah, they fall in the true fly family.
Correct. And then beetles, they are very well-known pollinators. Typically, kind of like less brightly colored, like a greenish or kind of off-white flowers that are kind of shallow, like disc shaped, because they don't have quite as long proboscis or mouth parts that allow them to reach the nectar. So they're shorter, kind of shallow nectar regions is what they prefer. But they are very big pollinators throughout the world. They're very, very important. So for such a small group, like I said, we could spend a couple days probably just on Coleoptera. So we're just going to stick on the overview because they are so diverse. So that will lead us to another pretty small group, the Raphidioptera.
So these
I'm not as familiar with.
These are a predatory group of insects comprising of 2 families and 260 species. They're a relicate group, which means they have reached their peak. These are scorpion flies or snake flies, my bad.
Yeah.
But they reached their peak, like species density, during the Cretaceous period, and now they're kind of on decline down to that 260 species. Out. Put a picture. These are snake flies named after their like longer neck portion and highly motile. Uh, so they kind of look like lacewings, which we've already covered, right?
I'm not sure if we've got. I think lacewings are next.
Lacewings are yes, or coming soon.
Yeah.
Lacewings look very similar, just with a more elongated thorax, um, very veiny wings, and most often possess a sturdy ovipositor for depositing eggs in concealed locations. They have that full metamorphosis, that four-stage life cycle: egg, larva, pupae, and adult. Oftentimes, their larvae develop under under the tree bark, and they're oftentimes found in these temperate coniferous forests.
So more of your pine, spruces, hemlocks, those evergreen trees that you see, like Christmas trees, if you're familiar with a Christmas tree, and found globally, but most often in Europe and Asia, the Eurasian supercontinent.
And the adults are very territorial and carnivorous, and are native predators for mites and aphids. And that'll bring us into our next grouping, the Neuroptera. Means net-winged insect. It's about 6,000 species. They have four membranous wings with many veins. So similar-ish to the snake flies.
But yeah, these are when we talk about the lace wings. These are your lace wings. So similar, those kind of big membrane wings. There, whoops. That's the wrong spot. There you go. You said like that net shape. They do have kind of larger chewing mouth parts, and they go through a complete metamorphosis. So it seems more of our extant groupings, especially that seems to be the more successful groupings within the insect class, do go through that complete metamorphosis. Your most diverse. So
these are like the super families like Neopterid or something like that.
The superfamily.
Yeah. Neoptera.
Yeah. So Holometabola is like the higher grouping, and then these, at least all of these guys like Coleoptera, fall under the Neuropteroidae.
Yeah, that's your twisted wing flies we talked about.
Beetles, snake flies, lace wings, and then our next group will be your alder flies and your Dobson flies. But we're not there yet. We're talking about our lace wings right now.
Right.
So originated during the Permian, but primarily diversified throughout the Mesozoic, so the time of the dinosaurs. Somewhat softer-bodied insects that really don't have a lot of specialization. Most of the larvae are predatory, eating aphids and other kind of smaller pest insects. And actually, some of the larvae are known to cover themselves in debris, like for camouflage. And the antlions actually are part of this group, which what they do, they bury themselves and kind of build little pits that they use to ambush, especially ants. If you've ever seen an antlion, it's just a small little depression where at the base of that depression will be
the mandibles.
The antlion, which they typically have very large heads with very large mandibles. But there are, so if you're a fan of Star Wars, the Sarlacc, it would be the Sarlacc pit.
That's a very good description.
That is a good description of what the antlions do. A vast majority of the adults are predatory. However, there are some that only feed on nectar, and there are other adults within this group that don't feed at all. They just become adults, mate, and then die. So that's something you don't see a lot in, especially the more derived species or groupings of insects. But some of those simpler ones, especially like we said, the mayflies, do that a ton.
Right. So that'll bring us into our next group, the Megaloptera. It's an order of insects containing alder flies, Dobson flies, and fish flies. And there's about 309 species, so kind of smaller in terms of insects here. Relatively unknown insects across much of their range due to their adult short lives. The aquatic larvae often high tolerance to pollution, and they're generally nocturnal. So these are like the hardest things to study that we've covered so far because their larvae don't do well in pollution, which is a common occurrence. They're nocturnal, Um, and the adults die shortly after mating. So
Yeah. So actually, the larvae are highly tolerant to pollution. So that's something where if you're in a very polluted area,
right,
yeah, they're not encountered a lot by people like that swim. So that's why they aren't.
That's why.
If you have a very polluted area, that's why you don't see as much. You'll see these more than any other insect because they are tolerant of that pollution. But that nocturnal um, habit means that they only come out at night, so they're much harder to find. Um, they're well known in the Americas. And the males have like a tusk-like mandible, so they have kind of a bit of a formidable appearance, but they're harmless to humans and other animals. They're more to impress females than anything else. And of course, the adults resemble the lacewings that we talked about. However, they have kind of a pleated, like a ridge structure on those hind wings, which helps them fold it over the abdomen. Of course, the strong mandibles and mouth parts that are adapted for chewing. However, many of the adults do not eat within the species, but they do have those large compound eyes. In the picture, you can see that white speck on the head, just below the antennae. That would be that large compound eye. And then some species do have those ocelli. The wings are pretty large, and they are sub-equal, which means I think they're fairly similarly sized. A lot of the insects, one set of the wings will be larger than the other. It just depends. But the females will lay up to 3,000 eggs in a single egg mass. They typically place them on vegetation that overhangs water, at which point when they hatch, the larvae will fall into the water. And they go through kind of a rudimentary form of complete metamorphosis. So there's not a ton of difference between the larval and adult forms, but there's enough that it kind of it can be considered a complete metamorphosis.
It's kind of like the stonefly, where the larval stage looks like a wingless version, but there's a pupa stage. This, I believe.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think so.
it's like a wingless version of it, but it still has that pupal stage that makes it a complete metamorphosis compared to just growing wings through instars.
Yeah, so I believe when you hear the term the helgramite, I believe that is a Dobson fly larvae. So especially people who fish, they're familiar with the helgramite. Let me pull up an image. Like I said, they're pretty voracious predators of other. There you go. That is a helgramite, which is actually a Dobson fly larva. So you can see compared to the image before, similar but different enough that they do have to metamorphosize into the adult. They're not quite as similar as like the larvae of the odonates or the other ones that have more of that incomplete um, metamorphosis.
Could you imagine being a Dobson fly? Like, well, let's put this in your perspective. You're the female Dobson fly, right?
Okay.
And I'm the male. And I come up to you and I'm like, "Hey, baby, want to see my mandibles? They're mighty large, aren't they?" But anyway, that brings us to our next group. Lepidoptera.
Yes, Lepidoptera.
Huge. Not as big as the beetles, but huge. These are your butterflies and moths. There's about 180,000 species, representing about 10% of all living organisms. So we have about 35% of all living organisms in two orders.
Yeah, so this is This is the second largest insect order behind Coleoptera, your beetles. Pardon me. So 126 families, 46 superfamilies. Of course, one of the most widespread and easily recognizable orders. Pretty much everyone around the world has seen a moth or a butterfly and knows what that is.
I can name like 6 of these.
Yeah, they're pretty easily describable as well because a lot of them have those bright colorations as well. The kind of they fly. It's not quite as an agile flight like the odonates. It's more of kind of a
flutter.
That flutter.
See what we've got. There's a swallowtail. There's a blue morpho.
Luna moth.
There's a monarch. Where's Luna moth?
The
big one.
It's a little hard to see. It's a very pale color on a white background.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so very, very well described. Um, they have a handful of derived features. The biggest thing is that actually they have scales covering their body. So that, on top of the exoskeleton, there's like a scale-like structure.
But they're not like fish scales or reptile scales.
Correct.
They're like developed hairs almost.
Kind of, yeah. As well, of course, the large triangular wings, and they have a long soft proboscis they use to siphon nectar. So they all the ones that feed as adults
Nectarbles.
Eat nectar, which is out of that kind of sugary substance that is in flowers, and it actually curls up kind of like if you curl a piece of paper, it curls up underneath of the head when they're not being used. Yeah, so like you said, those scales are like modified, flattened like hairs, and that's what gives them a lot of the colors and patterns, especially on their wings. And all species have some form of like membranous wings, but there are a couple that have reduced or absent wings. So there are some that really they'll probably look more not ant-like, but they don't have the wings, so they'd be much harder to describe. Of course, these are one of your most well-known whole metabolites that can undergo the complete metamorphosis. The larvae, commonly caterpillars, is the kind of colloquial term for them. Totally different, that worm-like structure compared to the adults. Kind of that long
pupae chrysalis phase.
Yeah.
But yeah, the caterpillars have long, thick bodies almost.
Yeah.
With pro legs on some species. Pro legs are like false legs.
Yeah. And then they use like a silk to form like a cocoon or a chrysalis. In butterflies, the chrysalis is more like a hardened structure, where the cocoon is typically a bit softer. However, once it emerges and it gets that hemosyl into that blood into the wings, and they kind of stretch out and harden, that is when they are sexually mature adults. They first appeared in like late Jurassic, so kind of early mid Cretaceous or Mesozoic, kind of time of the dinosaurs. Kind of co-evolved with flowering plants. That's about the time that the flowering plants evolved and began to spread throughout the world into the mid-late Cretaceous. So towards the end of the time of the dinosaurs is when you see the big explosion and diversity within them.
So the caterpillars themselves are actually herbivorous, oftentimes feeding on the leaves of these plants, and nectarivorous as adults. We discussed that long proboscis they use to get down into the stamen.
I think so.
It's either the pistil or the stamen. I'm going to say it's the stamen because that's the female part.
I believe so. Or the pistil is the female part.
It goes into one of them.
Yeah, it goes in like into the center of the flower. I believe it's the pistil is the female section where like the eggs and the nectar are housed.
And they are important pollinators, as we discussed. Although sometimes the caterpillars are considered pests. Certain species are considered pests in agriculture, since they can consume large quantities of plant matter. And the females can produce anywhere from 200 to 600 eggs, but others can lay 30,000 eggs in a single day. And these caterpillars obviously can produce a lot of damage. Although some are economically interesting because of their silk production, but others are, pest species that need to be exterminated. Found worldwide across all continents except Antarctica, and inhabit all terrestrial habitats ranging from deserts to rainforests, lowland grasslands to mountain plateaus. But there's almost always angiosperms in the area, which are the flowering plants that Alex talked about earlier.
Yeah. So there are some that actually exhibit different lifestyle, symbiotic or even parasitic lifestyles. Like there's a species of moth called the sloth moth. Say that 10 times fast. That is actually found exclusively inhabiting the fur of sloths in Central and South America. There are some that have the tinea moth that have been found feeding on the horny tissue from cattle. And then there is one is, I'm going to butcher this name, Xenodochium cosivorelia.
That's pretty close. That's pretty close.
It's an internal internal parasite of the species of the cochid kermes, which I believe is a frog. No, they're scale insects. Okay, never mind. And as well, they've been recorded. Yeah, they've been recorded breeding in many natural materials and refuse like owl pellets, bat caves, honeycomb, disease fruits, and like that. They actually do have a bit of a circulatory system, which uses hemolymph to circulate heat into the body. Um, like we talked about before, as they flap their wings, it produces a lot of heat, so they push that hemolymph into the wings to help kind of cool themselves. They have like a bit of a pulsating organ. They actually do sometimes actually have a heart, or the intake of air into. They actually have a trachea, so they're a little different. In the sense of the way their body is, the respiratory system is.
So the air is taken in through these spiracles, which we talked about at the beginning of the episode. They're like little tiny slits between segments that kind of help with air intake. So there's 3 different tracheas in most lepidopterans. One diffuses oxygen throughout the body, or like the musculature and the vessels. The ventral trachea supplies the ventral musculature and the nerve cord, and the visceral trachea supplies the guts, fat bodies, and gonads. So there's one trachea that's just for the abdomen portion, and there's 2 for the thoracic portion. One for the underbelly, and one for the top.
Yeah. And the lepidoperans, they actually will exhibit polymorphism, especially in some species. They actually exhibit sexual dimorphism, so the males and females look differently, as well as geographically they'll actually look different, and sometimes they'll look different seasons as well. So they can look different. The same species can look different in many different times, different sexes. So it creates a bit of trouble when trying to describe them, but
right. And some have that mimicry that we talked about. There's a couple of species that mimic monarchs, I believe, but there's at least one.
Yeah, monarch butterflies are typical, and they're not poisonous, but they're very bad tasting to birds. So there's a number of species. What was it, the Victoria moth?
Yeah, something like that.
I believe that looks like it mimics a monarch butterfly to prevent from being eaten, because birds know that monarchs do not taste good.
And then sometimes there's environmental polymorphism, which the traits are not inherited. So this is called polyphenism. A lot of times this is like the peppered moth. Mm-hmm. Me and Alex have read countless case studies on the peppered moth, where they identified the moth like pre-industrial evolution, and the surviving ones were more grayish white in color.
I believe the ones before it, like that pepper moth, they were like a grayish black kind of spotty color to blend in with the bark of trees. But during and after the Industrial Revolution, you get a lot of things like soot and smog, makes the surfaces of the plants darker. The surviving species were actually a darker gray,
almost
black to blend in with the bark that is now the darker color, because they don't stand out as much.
And sometimes you can have geographical isolation, which causes a lot of these different morphs. So there's the Indian white admiral, which has 5 forms. Since they're separated by like large mountain ranges, they don't get a lot of like interbreeding between the 5 forms. So an even better example is the Apollo butterfly, which has a lot of small local populations that have no contact with each other because they're poor migrators. There's over 600 different morphs with varying spots, size of spots and things like that, like almost like a Dalmatian, where
Yeah. Or like zebras, where they have different areas have different stripe patterns.
yeah.
Well, the overall lepidopterans are pretty good navigators, especially those that migrate, like the monarchs. They migrate a lot north to south. There'll actually be multiple generations that migrate, so they'll dip between different areas. Um, they actually are shown to navigate with using like a what's called a time compensated sun compass. So they actually are able to use the sun to orient themselves. They can see polarized light, uh, so that way they can orient even when it's cloudy. So um, rather than the light waves being just throughout the spectrum, it actually polarizes to specific wavelengths. And they're able to see that to allow them to navigate. And they can see up into the ultraviolet spectrum, which can actually be very important, especially with the sun on cloudy days. And of course, as we talked about, they have a lot of different ways that they can defend themselves, protect, like I said, that mimicry, those bright colors, the aposematism, um, which those bright colors indicate that they're not palatable, as well as some have like threat patterns and displays. There's some that when their wings are closed, they're like a dark bark color. When they open up, it's a very bright color, almost like eye spots on the back, which make look like a large predator or like a similar sized organism to the predator, which kind of scares it away, especially with those very bright colors.
And even the caterpillars have some of these displays. There's some species that have
I
like
know the tiger swallowtail butterfly, the caterpillar is actually on their the end of their abdomen. It actually looks almost like the head of a small snake, rather than just like the regular green. They have large eye spots that they're able to puff up. Um, kind of helps protect them because it can scare the predators. But the head is on the opposite end of the body, as a matter of fact.
are cantworms caterpillars?
I believe so.
Cantworms are gross.
Yeah, they produce a lot of, like we said, those like silkworms. They're actually caterpillars that produce large,
Nasty.
like
Summers.
like structures, especially if you get a lot of them in one place.
And they have like a spiny structure to them.
Yeah,
That is can like if you grab a cantworm, chances are your hand's gonna puff up.
yeah. There's some other or caterpillars as well that are actually very hairy, and those hairs similar to like a porcupine uh, needle, or spine. They will like rub off, and they're very like I don't know if they're silica based or what, but they're kind of
It's
they're
like
very
a fiberglass.
yeah, like very thin, fibery, very irritating. To the point that actually some people, if they're allergic to them, will have allergic reactions.
But as we said, lepidopterans are very good pollinators. The butterflies prefer large, flamboyant, often pink or purple, lavender color that often have a landing area to them. Not quite like the beetles have that big landing pad, but just somewhere for them to like perch on while they eat. And oftentimes they're strong scented, and
They tend to have like they're typically deeper, narrow flowers that so they have to use that long proboscis to get into the where the nectar is at.
right. And the moth pollinated flowers are typically that off-white color, night opening, very big, with a strong sweet scent, and they typically are night flowering. Uh, that'll move us on into our next group. We're not done yet, guys.
We're in the home stretch. We only got a few left.
We got a few pages left. Trichoptera. These are the caddisflies. These are a group of insects with aquatic larvae and terrestrial adults. About 14,500 described species, which are divided into suborders Integrapalpia and Anulipalpia, on the basis of their adult mouth parts. So the Integrapalpians have a portable case that can protect themselves to look for food, while the Anulipalpians make like a fixed retreat, and they're more ambush predators.
So here I'll pull up an image of like we said, they actually whatever kind of substrate. So in this case, it looks like they had some in a lab that they actually gave like precious metals and jewels. Yeah, he's looking very fancy, but you can see they kind of spin together that little protective casing around most of the body. In natural environments, it's typically things like rocks, kind of some of that harder substrate. But in this case, this was in a lab, most likely, that they had many of them. Kind of gave them precious metals to use.
That's cool.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. The adults look a bit more fly-like. Is the image that we have pulled up here now. Yeah, so we said there's aquatic larvae. They're found pretty much anywhere that there's fresh water, even like vernal pools. They can have been found in the ocean, so I shouldn't say they're just fresh water. They use like a silk to make those cases, like gravel, sand, twigs, bits of plant, other debris. The larvae, a lot of different feeding strategies, predators, leaf shredders, so aquatic vegetation, algae grazers, even some that feed on small particles within the water column. And however, the adults typically have short lives where they don't feed. So it's primarily the larvae, which then become the breeding adults, which then breed, lay their eggs, and then die.
Right. So we found fossilized caddisflies dating back to the Triassic period, with the largest of these remains being larval cases of these twigs, rocks, things that we see today that are evidence of caddisflies. But the actual body fossils of these are extremely rare. The oldest ones we have being from the early and middle Triassic, about 230 million years ago. And a lot of times we don't have full bodies, but we have wings. Wings are a very common fossilization piece for these guys.
Yeah. As far as the larvae are concerned, they actually can be found like they call them feeding guilds, so I'm guessing that's just different feeding groups within the water column. A lot of the very early and late stage larvae tend to be more like gatherers, picking up fragments of organic matter from the bottom of their aquatic environment. However, others are more filtery, where they catch those particles moving through the water, as well as those that even making like little silken nets to grab those things. And of course, the others that are like scrapers that feed off rocks and different algae, and then the shredders that will feed on that more leafy plant matter, and then of course the predatory ones that will feed on other insects, tiny crustaceans, worms, things like that. And there's some that are actually scavengers that feed on dead animals and fish and other larvae that are within the water. But most of them, they're most well known for those cases that the larvae make, and there are about 30 families that adopt that stratagem. So they're fairly kind of common. Like you said, there's two distinct groups that exhibit that.
So that'll lead us into our next group, the Diptera. These are your... these leads you into the true flies. There's about 125 described species. This is, I believe, the third.
125,000, you mean?
What did I say?
125.
125,000 species, making this the third largest group, I believe.
I think so.
After Lepidoptera. So this means... so Diptera comes from di, meaning two, and pteron, meaning wings. They use only a single pair of wings to fly. The hind wings have evolved into more mechanosensory organs known as halteres, which act as high-speed sensors of rotational movement and allow dipterans to perform advanced aerobatics. So they're highly motile in the air. If you've ever seen a fruit fly flying around in your house, it's kind of obnoxious and hard to get.
Correct. Yeah, and they actually can see in pretty high speed. It's kind of crazy.
Sorry about that, guys. We had some
technical difficulties with my computer we're using as the microphone, so we apologize if the audio is not quite as good. So as we were saying, or Tyler was saying, with those like mouth parts like the flies, they kind of throw up those digestive enzymes onto their food and then use their mouth to kind of lap it up to eat that food, especially like the fruit flies, especially in your house flies, things like that. But the thing that this diptera, as we talked about, means two wing, because we talked about those halteres and the lace wings? One of the previous groups we talked about, those little kind of club-like organs that instead of having a second pair of wings, they've developed into those of kind of a gyroscopic movement. But they give them, they're very maneuverable, and when they fly, and they have little claws and pads on their feet that let them cling to smooth surfaces, so that's why they can climb up like glass, things like that. And of course, this is a pretty major insect order with a lot of ecological importance. They are pollinators, actually even more so than the butterflies, second only to bees and their relatives. So they're actually thought to be some of the earliest evolutionary pollinators for plants.
But they came around before, like the angiosperms. So the question that people ask nowadays is, well, what do they eat before? Like, what do they eat before they pollinated fruits and stuff like that? Because a lot of flies now are nectarivores or food eating. Not many eat vegetation, I believe.
Not like the green vegetation, no.
Right. So, although as much as we say many are pollinators, some are also vectors for some nasty diseases, and others are used as research. Alex and I both took genetics, and in genetics use a lot of fruit flies for testing because of their reproductive rate as well as their ease of use.
Yeah, they have a very short reproductive cycle. Like, what is it? A few days, I believe. A few days to a week, I think, something like that. Is their total life cycle.
We would run a test on allow on a Tuesday, and by the next Tuesday there'd be a whole new generation hatched and flying. But as I said, they're vectors for a lot of bad diseases, especially with
mosquitoes.
Mosquitoes can spread malaria, dengue fever, West Nile, yellow fever, encephalitis, and a lot of other diseases. Whereas houseflies really just spread a lot of foodborne illnesses because that's what they eat is human food. So E. coli spreads through houseflies, I believe.
So.
That's the big one that I can think of.
Yeah, and like we said, that single pair of wings is why these are kind of considered like the true flies, even though there are other insects that have fly in the name. There are actually some one group called the louse flies that are actually wingless. That's more of a derived trait. As Tyler said, most of the true flies, middle Triassic, about 240 million years ago, is when they first appeared, and then of course became more widespread in that later Triassic period. Abundant in all terrestrial habitats except for, of course, Antarctica. Many insects that people are familiar with, like the house flies, mosquitoes, gnats, midges, things like that. Some of those biting flies, with very great diversity. There's like you said, the small order that are kind of more skinny, slender, with the long antennae, like the mosquitoes, crane flies, gnats.
And then the Brachycera, which is what we think of when we think of like house flies and things like that. They're that more short, stocky body type with a more robust abdomen and shorter antennae. That Brachycera group is also very ecologically diverse, many being predatory during the larval stage and some being parasitic. The parasitoids for them are mostly mollusks, millipedes, mammals, insects, and amphibians. So,
pretty much most other terrestrial organisms.
Yeah. They have a lot of mimicry, why I said the hoverflies use Batesian mimicry to kind of imitate a bee, a wasp, some of those stinging insects, So it's like, hey, don't screw with me because I can sting you, even though I don't have a sting. I'm just a fly. And some species of fruit fly can even resemble spiders, which is interesting because that's a whole another set of legs you're missing.
Yeah. And then as well, there's some that can resemble ants, actually living, especially the young, live and grow within the ant colony, mimicking those chemical odors that the ants make. And then the bumbilid bee fly looks a lot like bees or honey bumblebees. So bumblebees. So that way they are able to visit the flowers, nectar, things like that, without while still looking like bees to protect them from predators. So this will move us into we got 2 more orders. We're almost there, guys. So hopefully you can bear with us as we have after our little technical difficulty.
Right. So we're going into Mecoptera, which is the scorpion flies. There's about 600 species through 9 families. They get their name from the enlarged genitalia raised over their body, which resembles a scorpion tail. We're sorry we don't have images right now. We're kind of running off of one computer that's 6 feet away from us.
Yeah.
So
apologies for that. I mean, these last couple, feel free to look them up on your own.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Scorpion fly. And the last group's gonna be fleas. So
Siphonaptera is the last group, which is your fleas. Of course, 2,500 flightless insects. They're actually jumpers. But before we get there,
we're not there yet. So
sorry, I'm getting excited.
Scorpion flies get their name from their enlarged genitalia, as I said, resembling a scorpion tail. Hanging flies, which is a smaller group within this order, have elaborate mating rituals. The snow scorpion flies live in the tundra or other temperate regions, so not the tropics of the other scorpion flies. Okay. Early species are believed to be pollinators for the extinct gymnosperms, like cycads.
Yeah.
Before today's pollinators kind of evolved and took over that niche. They're also kind of helpful in forensic entomology because their larvae are some of the first ones to be seen. Them in general are some of the first things to be seen on these corpses and things like that. Forensic entomology is becoming a large portion of forensics nowadays. We're using viable stages, flies, things like that, things that come to corpses and cadavers to determine time of death and things like that. However, the earliest fossils from these scorpion flies originate all the way back from the Upper Permian and develop into abundance during the Cretaceous period. So, developed during the Proterozoic period. No, that's not
No.
But really come into their abundance during the Mesozoic.
Seems like my computer is having an internet problem, so that's why we lost that. So,
however, nowadays a lot of these Mecopterans have left that pollinator role and have become more of scavengers, feeding on decaying vegetation and dead invertebrates. Which leads us to our last grouping, Siphonaptera. Alex?
Yeah, so as I started a little bit before, these are the fleas. Many people, especially if you have pets, you're familiar with what a flea is. There's 2,500 species of these flightless insects. They're all external parasites to mammals and birds. Since they lack wings, they have well-developed legs that allow them to jump very far. I think, 20 times their body size?
50.
50 times their body. If I'd have read further down in the notes. As well as they have kind of claws on their legs that allow them to hang on and keeps them from falling off their host. And then, of course, piercing and sucking mouth parts. Like I said, these are all external parasites. Seems like they kind of specialize from a lineage of parasitic scorpion flies, and as well as they are vectors for a number of diseases, including the bubonic plague from the Middle Ages. Yeah, so that's where it wasn't the rats, but the fleas that lived on the rats and mice that led to the infection of the bubonic plague bacteria.
And with that, we have covered our lesson for the day.
Woo!
And we're going to wrap up, as we always do, with our amazing species, our most wanted,
Yeah.
and our from the vault.
Yes, sir.
So I'll get us started with our amazing species of the week. Today's amazing species is the rusty patch bumblebee. Very common. Not very common. It's actually critically endangered. But it's from our neck of the woods, that Midwest, Northeast area of the United States, from Maine to Michigan, all the way down to North Carolina. They are pretty common historically, but over the past couple decades, their population has decreased tremendously, and like the range is still there. They still have about the same range. It's just the populations within that range are being more sporadic, not as widespread as they used to be.
Yeah. And so these look pretty similar to your typical bumblebee kind of look, but on their abdomen they have two little kind of that rusty coppery color, and that's on the abdomen, which gives them the name rusty patch. So just for folks, since we don't have images right now, just to give you an idea of what they look like.
Right. So it says that the relative abundance declined from up to 95%. So they used to be widespread, and now they've been shut down to about 5% of the previous abundancy, and they have lost about 70 to 87% of the range, which is weird to me because later on the IUCN webpage it says they haven't lost a whole bunch of their range.
I think it's just that's how much they have within their range, or even probably a lot of like habitat loss is what they mean.
Right.
So probably they're still within that native range. What is still available to them? I'm guessing that's more of a habitat loss due to urbanization.
Yeah. So as Alex was talking about urbanization, let's break into the threats a little bit. So on the human level, you have housing and urbanization, as well as commercial and industrial uses. So basically, just the expansion of human cities and stuff like that is tearing their populations and their range apart, as well as livestock farming and ranching. So they feed on like the clover and things like that, pollinate those plants.
Yeah, your native pollinators, which are then lost from farming because you get a lot of just grasses, and then as well as non-timber crops like your corns, things like that, corns, wheats that are not like their native plants that they pollinate. And also, of course, mining and quarrying, they take up a lot of
big in this area, especially large natural gas pads, coal mines, quarries,
especially those surface mines that remove all of the vegetation in large areas.
They just make a big pit in the ground, basically. Fire, like wildfires, are kind of not good for like the more herbivorous plants. The woody plants have kind of adapted to kind of tolerate a little bit more.
Yeah, and of course some are more tolerant than others.
Right. But a lot of the time, these pollinators are seeking out the more flowery herbivorous plants over the woody shrubs and things like that, as well as the invasives, non-native species, aliens, as well as the diseases that those bring that affect this rusty patch bumblebee.
And then, like everything else, climate change, habitat shifting, drought, which prevents a lot of the plant growth, temperature extremes, both hot and cold. There's, of course, that ideal range. And a lot of, like we said, a lot of these insects, since they produce that heat, especially through flight, have to dissipate it. When it's hot, the air temperature is hotter, it's harder for them to dissipate that heat, causing them to overheat and die. And then extreme storms and flooding. In our area, actually, last week we had a couple tornadoes touch down, which, of course, not quite the level of like the American Midwest, but still very, very damaging, especially in an area, but it causes some serious habitat destruction, things like that. So, Tyler, to step away for a second.
I'm looking for a tape measure. My brother has one down here somewhere.
Okay. That's okay. So real quick, while Tyler, I believe we're wrapped up with our.
Yeah, we have concluded all our rusty pack will be. We're going to move into Alex's most wanted.
Yeah, so my most wanted for this week is the elm zigzag sawflies. So we talked about the sawflies. They're a forest pest native to Asia, especially like China and Japan region. However, they've been imported into North America, and they've caused, especially on elm, like the name describes, on elm trees, which have already been impacted by a couple of diseases like Dutch elm disease. Causes severe defoliation, which of course cascades into different impacts on forest ecology because they are fairly important tree species. They're secondary succession, or they're later successional species, but they do grow very large, and it gets its name due to the larvae kind of leaving a distinct zigzag pattern on the leaves as they feed. First reported in July of 2020 in Quebec, which is in Canada, but it's possible that they were here before that. They're not 100% sure, but it was actually first identified by groups of citizen scientists. So it's citizen science is a growing in popularity. So non-professional, quote unquote, scientists who go out and look for things on the phone application iNaturalist, which is a kind of like an app that allows you to take pictures and look at different species. They have a partner app called Seek, which is a more real-time identification, which then you're able to upload it to that iNaturalist application.
Yeah, we use these apps at times.
Yes, we use them a lot. They're very helpful, very useful, as well as for things like this. It's able to track the distribution of different species, both invasive and native, and so it helps professional scientists keep track of these things. Then, of course, it was confirmed by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, which I believe is one of their governing bodies for things like that. And of course, they continue to monitor it, especially promoting that public citizen science reporting of it. But as of now, I'm not sure if it's made too much of a move south yet. He said it's a bit more of a recent species, but I believe it has started into the United States some. It's already federally listed as a invasive species, so it could be could become quite an issue, especially like we said with Dutch elm disease and elm trees. In a lot of cities, elm trees were planted due to their tolerance for the poor soils of urban environments. They were planting a lot of those roadside trees or elm trees, which have subsequently died due to Dutch elm disease because there was a lot of monoculture, meaning they just planted those elm trees.
So it could just spread.
Yeah, so it was able to just spread, and that's something that could happen with these sawflies. They could impact a lot of those urban trees as well. But that'll conclude our most wanted for today. Going to our last segment as we wrap up our From the Vault, our going through the fossil record, and we're looking at an extinct genus of the Tyler, if you want to take it away.
Yes, we're going to talk about Meganeuropsis, which is a large griffin fly genus. Griffin flies are like ancestors to modern day dragonflies. So this genus includes two species, Meganeuropsis permiana actually, and Meganeuropsis americana. So M. permiana was described in 1939 in Elmo, Kansas, and was one of the largest insects to exist. This had a wingspan of 330 millimeters, or 13 inches. So that's one wing from wingtip back to thorax.
So it is a wing length, so a single wing.
Yeah. So the wingspan,
so both wings
stretched out. They said a wingspan of 710 millimeters, or 28 inches, which is over 2 feet, almost 2.5.
Massive.
That's why I was looking for a tape measure.
Okay.
So not only that, so wingspan of almost 2.5 feet, and a length of 17 inches. So it's over a foot long.
So you think? I mean, I'm almost 6 feet tall, so roughly my one arm stretched out is probably about as wide as their wingspan would be.
Yeah.
So you think that's a very, very large animal, or insect.
I think my laptop is a 17-inch screen as I pull it out of the wall. So that big.
Very large. They're very big insect. course, being dragonflies, they would have been predators. I'm
Right.
sure fed a lot of the other very large insects of this time frame. I'm sure they
would also be as well.
Yeah.
So the M. americana is probably a junior synonym, so probably the same species, but we only have a couple fossils to go off of, mostly wing segments. So these ones are usually about 12 inches or 305 millimeters in length. That's really the only fossil we have, these wing segments, not really any fully formed fossils. So that's why the theory is that it's just a junior, more juvenile form of this griffin fly. But that will conclude today's episode after about almost 3 hours.
Yeah, so as we said, this is a super episode. We're trying to cover all the insects in one go. I think we did pretty well. But as always, if you guys have more you want to hear about, more you want to learn, something you want us to go in deeper on, get a hold of us on our social medias. Facebook is Life Complete Story Podcast.
Yeah, at Life the Complete Story on Facebook, Life Complete Story on Instagram. Yeah. Make sure you follow us on Spotify.
Rate
the podcast. I think we have a poll at the end of every podcast if you want to fill the polls out. On YouTube, follow us. Subscribe on YouTube. Not follow. Subscribe at Life the Complete Story. Leave a comment, like the videos. It helps a lot. Do the algorithm thing. So make sure you ring the notification bell so you get notified when we upload a new podcast. I believe I have it set up so they air a week after they do on Spotify, but chances are I'm behind on that, so I'm just going to make it simultaneous.
Yeah. And then, of course, anything you want to message us directly, you can email us at lifecompletestory@gmail.com. So with that, I think that'll wrap us up for today. I think we're going to take a break next week after this super episode.
Yeah, we'll give it a breather, let you guys digest 3 hours of information, and we will come back for echinoderms.
I believe so, yeah. So we're
wrapping up
finished with arthropods.
Yes.
So we'll be wrapping up our invertebrates here shortly. We got a few more groups we got to cover.
Just one.
It might just be one.
Yeah,
we'll have to look.
We have about 2 episodes till we get to the good stuff. I think we can cover echinoderms in 1 episode.
Yeah.
We'll discuss this later. You guys don't need to hear about our plans.
Yeah, absolutely. But then after we finish our invertebrates, we'll get into our vertebrates, which is the thing that most people know and love. It's your scaly, furry, fuzzy friends, like your pets.
Feathered friends.
And feathered, yeah. So,
and we're going to break those down even further. So expect more episodes like we did today, where we cover down to the order.
Yeah. Just because of the diversity within them, as well as they're more interesting. They're the things that most people know and love.
They're a lot larger too, so it's not like 200 species in one family.
Correct.
But as always, keep learning.
Learn something new
every day.
Yes, sir.
And we will see you guys in 2 weeks.
2 weeks. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. As Tyler logs us off.
Let us know how we did. Let us know if you like these in-person episodes. We live close enough that we can
do more of them. Yeah, but we're glad you could join us today. And as we said, learn something new, and we'll see you next time.